Minister Kullgren, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, so great to see you here at the conference Living in the Bioeconomy. I'm sure most of you in this room is aware of Thomas Malthus, who said more than 200 years ago that the power of population is clearly greater than the power of the earth to sustain man. That quote really marks the bioeconomy. 200 years ago, we did live in the bioeconomy. We know what happens after that. We were 1 billion people, and Malthus was, of course, afraid that the fact that the earth would not be able to sustain a growth of the population. We know that it actually worked out. We are 8 billion people here today. But we know also that a lot of this development came from the fact that we started to use fossil resources, industrialization. We had a tremendous growth of our economy, of our societies, of welfare in the next 200 years. Now we also know the price of this. Climate change, environmental damage, increasing also geopolitical tensions from the dependence on a limited resource, fossil fuels. So now we are back again, talking about the bioeconomy of the future, renewable resources. But today, the bioeconomy and the renewable resources need to sustain 8 billion people and still a growing population. These are challenges, but we also know that we have a very innovative society today. We have technologies and knowledge we did not have 200 years ago. So this is what this conference will be all about. Discuss the opportunities of the bioeconomy and clearly, I'm sure, some of the challenges that also exist and we have to deal with. And the leadership that Europe needs to take in this transition. A leadership in thought, in mindset, but also in terms of innovation and technology. As part of the Green Deal, the transition to a green society, but also a vision for a stronger Europe, a competitive Europe. So this is what the conference Living in the Bioeconomy is all about. My name is Johan Kylenstierna. I am the Director-General of Formas, which is a research council for sustainable development, but I'm very honored and very pleased to serve as the moderator for these 2 days that we're going to meet here in this beautiful room outside of Stockholm during the EU presidency. To welcome you here and to give the opening remarks, I'm very pleased to invite our Minister for Rural Affairs, Peter Kullgren. Please give him an applause.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. On behalf of the Swedish government, I would like to welcome you all to this conference arranged by the Swedish EU presidency. I'm very happy and grateful that so many have chosen to come to Stockholm to participate in today's and tomorrow's discussion on bioeconomy and how we can make the transition to a sustainable and circular bio-based society. Bioeconomy is a priority for the Swedish EU presidency. Last week, the Swedish Parliament arranged an inter-parliamentary conference on circular bioeconomy. As well as arranging these conferences, we are currently working on council conclusions on bioeconomy in the light of current challenges. Special attention is given to the role of rural areas as they have a particularly important role for the development of bioeconomy. I will get back to that in just a moment. Today, we will put focus a little bit further up in the value chain. Firstly, we look into the theme of today's conference, Living in the Bioeconomy. How well developed is bioeconomy in Europe today? And what solutions do we have for a bio-based economy and life? Tomorrow, we look closer into resource-efficient value chains and the opportunities for a growing bioeconomy, circularity, and substitution of fossil materials. A good starting point for our discussion is the ongoing climate crisis. A growing circular bioeconomy is a central tool in the toolbox to mitigate climate change. In front of us, we have a gigantic, but not impossible, challenge to phase out fossil materials and energy. And the time is limited if we are to manage our part of the Paris Agreement and reach the target of a climate-neutral EU by 2050. The bioeconomy has the potential to replace most of today's fossil-based materials, not only by using wood in buildings, but by developing all kinds of new innovative products based on biomass from the forest, cropland, and sea. One of our most common and most used bio-based product is the food we eat. There is also a great potential to improve and develop more sustainable and resource-efficient practices and products, as well as use side streams in the production for other purposes. This is important, especially to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. I know that some of you will participate in the study trip to Torsåker farm, where they will present some exciting examples how food production may look like in the future. Bioenergy in different forms, heating, electricity production, as well as biofuels, is one important component in phasing out fossil energy in the European Union. Also, bioenergy has the unique possibility of producing permanent negative emissions by applying carbon capture and storage as an add-on to bio-based energy production. According to IPCC, this is a key to reach ambitious reduction targets. Sometimes we talk about the circular bio-based economy as something in the far-fetched future. But at least for us here in Sweden, we are right in the middle of the transition. We started our journey in 1991 with the introduction of the national carbon dioxide tax on fossil fuel emissions. Since then, the tax has been increased and many other measures has been introduced over the years. As a result, Swedish emissions has decreased by over 30%, while economic growth has been maintained. The one key action so far has been the replacement of fossil fuel with heat pumps and bio-based energy in the heating and industry sector. We have, for example, been able to cut over 90% of emission from heating. To reach further, we need to further reduce fossil emissions in the transport sector, reduce the climate impact in agriculture, increase energy efficiency, enhance substitution of fossil materials with bio-based alternatives, and much, much more. I hope that many of you had the opportunity to take a visit to Stockholm Exergi this morning and its bioenergy carbon capture storage pilot project. In the 1990s, they started to phase out fossil resources and substitute with renewable to achieve net zero emissions. Now they are developing large-scale bioenergy carbon capture storage technology to produce negative emissions. I hope this can open the door for others to follow, as well in Sweden, in Europe, and globally. Obviously, the bioeconomy has a particularly strong connections to rural areas. A growing circular bioeconomy stimulates green and innovative jobs and diversification of income. Development of new innovative bio-based products and value change will contribute to put additional value to local and regionally available biomass. On the other hand, the development of rural areas is necessary for a growing bioeconomy as such. However, we should not forget that primary producers are the first important part in the value chain. Thus, the possibility to live, work, and study in rural areas is fundamental for thriving bioeconomy. Unfortunately, we have multiple societal challenges in today's Europe. There is a terrible ongoing war in Ukraine, a close neighbor to all of us. The victims among soldiers and civilians are counted in hundreds of thousands, and complete communities are wiped out of the map. EU must stand up for the European democracy and give all the support to Ukraine that is possible. And before the war in Ukraine escalated, we had already been through 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Both the war in Ukraine and the COVID pandemic points out the need for a strong civil defense and strengthened crisis preparedness within EU and its member states. In a European context, a growing bioeconomy has a lot to offer in this direction and should not be neglected. So, what needs to be done to better utilize the potential of the sustainable circle bioeconomy to address needs of today and in the future? I hope we'll hear some good ideas and get some answers here today. We very much appreciate the updated EU Bioeconomy Strategy from 2018 as a valuable tool that should be further enhanced. We also appreciated the progress report published last summer, as well as the conference organized by the Commission in October. Our aim is to build on this during the next 2 days. With the recent development in Europe in mind, and with the progress report of the Bioeconomy Strategy from last year as a base, I have initiated a process in the Agri-Fish Council to agree on Council conclusions, giving additional guidance on development of a circular bioeconomy in the European Union. So last month I led the discussions between the agriculture ministers on the status of the European bioeconomy and additional measures needed to facilitate a growing bioeconomy with special focus on rural development. One issue raised by several ministers during the discussion was the need for a more coherent and cross-sectorial approach in the EU. To avoid creating new unnecessary hurdles, the impact on the circular bioeconomy needs to be taken much more into account when developing policies in different areas. Also, the principle of subsidiarity is important. Creating very detailed legislation trying to contain all the diversity within the Union instead risks creating regulations that in fact fits very few. Regional diversity needs to be acknowledged and also made good use of as a common EU advantage. So again, a warm welcome to Stockholm. I'm looking forward to 2 intense days of discussions around different aspects of our common, growing circular and bio-based economy. Hopefully, some bright ideas will be put on the floor, helping all of us, passing some of the hurdles in front of us. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister, for also giving us some tasks here. I mean, be practical, clear ideas of what we can do. Think system-wide, rural development, cross-disciplinary. I mean, these are things we are going to discuss in the next few days, and I'm sure that many of our speakers, both from the private sector, from civil society, from academia, from policy, they will all contribute different pieces of this. And I hope really we're going to have a very dynamic and open dialogue. Maybe some debate here and then. There are, critical questions to be asked and to be discussed. But more all a dialogue. That's really what the European Union is all about, to actually agree on things. We are now going to listen to the next speaker. He will not be here with us in the room. We have a recording. Wolfgang Burtscher, Director-General of DG Agri. So please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for inviting me to take part in this very interesting and timely conference, Living in the Bioeconomy. I regret not being able to join you in person, but it is my great pleasure and honor to send you this opening message. I also send my congratulations to the Swedish Council Presidency for organizing this conference. You are sending a clear signal about the importance of the bioeconomy, especially in light of our current challenges. These challenges require us to find new ways of producing and consuming resources, new ways that can safeguard food and energy security for growing populations without negatively impacting our land, climate, and ecosystems. In the bioeconomy, I believe we can find exciting new ways forward. Today, the bioeconomy already employs just over 17 million people and generates over 650 billion of added value to the European Union economy. In our long-term vision for rural areas, we estimate that by further developing the bioeconomy, we can create up to 400,000 new, highly skilled jobs by 2035 and up to 700,000 by 2050, mostly in rural areas. That is why the Commission is getting behind the bioeconomy. Our latest progress report on the European Union Bioeconomy Strategy shows that we are making good progress. And as you know, for the first time, the bioeconomy is included in one of the Common Agricultural Policy strategic objectives. All member states chose to support the bioeconomy in their CAP strategic plans, so I hope we will see concrete impacts on the ground very soon. But to unleash the full potential of the bioeconomy, we must ensure that primary producers are able to capture a fair share of the benefits. At present, farmers and forest managers are not very well integrated into bioeconomy value chains. They play the role of biomass suppliers rather than producers of bio-based products. To generate additional and diversified income, we must enable them to fully and effectively integrate themselves into new value chains. This is the only way we can achieve our objectives to create more skillful jobs and sustainable economic opportunities for farmers, foresters, and rural communities. To conclude, I would like to thank the Swedish Presidency for putting the bioeconomy so high on its agenda. I am sure that today's conference will provide a rich source of inspiration, including for the upcoming Council conclusions. I look forward to learning the outcomes of today's conference, to discover more about the challenges and opportunities of building the bioeconomy and what living in bioeconomy actually entails. On behalf of the European Commission, let me say that we will continue to work closely with all member states and stakeholders. Together, we can bring the bioeconomy to life across the European Union. On that note, I thank you for your time and attention, and I wish you all a successful and inspiring conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think all other speakers are going to be here live from now on. So that's wonderful. And the next speaker, we heard about the EU Bioeconomy Strategy Progress Report. The next speaker will certainly talk about this. Mr. John Bell, Director for Healthy Planet at DG Research and Innovation. Please, the floor is yours. Give him an applaud.
Thank you very much. I was told on my way here that apparently I wasn't coming because I was sick, even though I didn't know that I was sick. So if I'm sick, do let me know. whatever way the presentation goes down. Dear Minister, and a very significant presence of Minister Kullgren, Director-General Johan, our colleagues, Wolfgang, who of course you know has been a great champion, ladies and gentlemen, and people back at home, wherever you are in the bioeconomy in Europe, and its diversity, as the Minister has said, is its strength. And at risk of a diplomatic incident, Johan, tack för inbjudan till denna konferens. Thank you. Okay. Probably my pronunciation needs some work, but I'm told that in English as well, as an Irishman. We're at a very critical moment. We don't need to look anywhere at any point to realize that we see around us all our great assumptions are shifting. Things that we thought were outliers a year or two ago, ideas that we thought were interesting but not essential, questions that we had. Almost all of our assumptions are shown to be what they are, assumptions, and we move now into this period, this decade of decision, wherever you are in the European Union or elsewhere, and certainly in our neighbourhood, to realise that we have decisions to make and we have the means to make these decisions. So I'd like to just say three basic things. One, this is a very critical moment, and the Swedish presidency bringing the bioeconomy back into the institutional setting and saying that we need to have a renewed momentum, a new ambition, and the application of the bioeconomy in places where those who are most vulnerable in terms of socio-economic transitions. And whereas Wolfgang said, if you talk about our primary producers, people working in farming or forestry or food or coastal areas, or some of the industries that are faced with transition, if we're going to make this transition, the bioeconomy, a sustainable version of which, will be the motor of that, whatever that looks like, and it will look differently in different places. And I very much strongly welcome the Swedish presidency's leadership on this, and indeed the response that Minister Kullgren has had in the Agriculture Council from many different kinds of countries around Europe. It's a critical moment. The second thing is the point I made at this extraordinary event that we had. I don't know, was it like, you know, people getting released, demob happy from COVID prison, but the event, Dara, I see the youth bio ambassadors here, there's an extraordinary energy in the bioeconomy event and a concrete positivity about the fact that we can actually harness this great transition, both to meet our critical task in the next 10 years to 20 years, which is to make peace with nature in terms of climate and biodiversity, and to make progress from that piece. In other words, to turn the transition to something that works for real people in real places, in very different places, who are very often left behind. And that the next economy, which is the new version of the bioeconomy, although the bioeconomy is the oldest economy we've all lived in, can have the same problems that the current economy has, which is where you have lots of inequality and things that don't work. So we have to make sure that the people, as Wolfgang has said, if you're a primary producer, you don't end up as a tenant in the next economy, but you end up as one of the people co-creating value and bringing it into the communities where people actually want to live and continue to live. So we're moving the bioeconomy, or it is moving from niche to norm. It's no longer the idea that it was even 10 years ago. And you'll see and hear from speakers the visits that you were on this morning, the remarkable work that is happening in the Circular Biobased Europe initiative. Really, we're moving from piloting things to see us scaling up, to see, if you like, the bioeconomy coming down to earth in real places. And the third point, which is the title of our event here, which is about living in the bioeconomy. It's not for researchers or for civil servants. It's supposed to be a place where people want to live with their cultures, with their histories, with their geographies, with their industries, with their way of life, which is very much a question mark for many of them when they hear the big challenges that are facing them, the big changes that will take place to our environment, to our planet, to our climate, if we don't act together. So we have to make this next version of the bioeconomy, I think the word you use, Johan, we need to have a vision. We need to see, what does it look like if you're working, we were talking with colleagues today, if you're doing forestry or energy in the north of Sweden, or you're working in a coastal blue bioeconomy community on an island, or you were working in one of these very important large employment food areas or industries, or you're working on the cutting edge of biotechnology, or you're working in a city trying to work out how to make things carbon neutral and circular and so forth. We now need to move that on. That's the challenge that we have. So I guess what is happening to our fellow Europeans in Ukraine is not surprising, however shocking it is. But it's a reminder, if ever we needed it, that here in Europe, the business of making peace, in the end, will come down to how we reshape our economic interdependence. And let us not forget that Ukraine and what Ukraine will need from us in terms of its reconstruction, the bioeconomy will also be at the heart of that, and we need to be ready and willing and able to move on that, as indeed I know people are preparing to be. On the timing, I will talk in a moment about the points that both Johan and the Minister have set up. You and we have done a huge amount of work in waves of cooperation, collaboration, and research, innovation, and policy. But the timing is now very critical. We have a number of big targets that real places and real people have to try and meet in the next 10 years. We have a vast amount of research and innovation and investment. There's a wall of money out there waiting to be de-risked and anchored into sustainable new value chains and systems. But we need to have a political mandate to take it to the next level. These things don't just happen. One of the big striking features, I noted very carefully what the Minister was saying about, what is the right regulatory fit, the predictability that people need, the space in some places that they need, the clarity in other places that they need. That's not going to come out of thin air. But there needs to be a political mandate. There needs to be a sense that at the European Union level, and this is what Sweden is doing by bringing it forward at the Council, there's an institutional commitment to move to the next level and to set a target for people like me and us who are working across. I have many colleagues here from across the Commission. For the Commission, I think many of you heard Vice President Timmermans making that point at the conference. She's stressing the potential of the bioeconomy to unlock the opportunities of what is called the new European innovation agenda. You're going to hear lots of things about different kinds of innovation, different places. And later in the year, there will be a focus from Commissioner Gabriel. It'll have the word valley in it, but it's about these new food and bioeconomy innovation valleys, which is trying to have clustering at regional level to really move things forward. This regional deep tech to deploy the bioeconomy in practice and to help us to revitalize rural areas, as she says in this message, which you very much welcome. It's a complicated word in countries that are not Sweden. It's the oldest part of the economy. It's been on our radar as a really structuring horizontal policy for more than 10 years now. In 2012, it had 5 clear objectives, which I think have proved to be robust, ensuring food and nutrition security, managing natural resources sustainably, reducing our dependence on non-renewable and unsustainable resources sourced domestically or abroad. And there the word resilience will come back into our understanding of the bioeconomy. This next bioeconomy has to give us the resilience that we've all recently learned is central to our way of life. Mitigating and adapting to climate change and strengthening European competitiveness and creating jobs. They remain relevant today as objectives. They're central to the updated Bioeconomy Strategy of 2018, which the Minister referred to, where the concepts of sustainability and circularity were placed more at the centre while we're looking at a holistic way of moving things forward. I mean, one of the strange things about the last year is having to think about many interconnected things at the same time. And many of us in policy, that's a difficult thing in itself. But trying to think about how we move forward, if we don't have a framing like bioeconomy to think about food security and water security and industrial regeneration, climate sequestration and technology application and de-risking funding and the energy challenge that everybody has, and these things are now a reality on the news every day. We have the framing and we have the policy to do that. The strategy update in 2018 was co-created across different Commission services, different departments. And this is one of the important aspects of this. It's teaching us how to work in a systemic, interconnected way beyond and including the different sectors that are there. and this is crucial to represent the cross-cutting nature of the bioeconomy. We strongly welcome and encourage member states and regions to work across ministries and departments and between different levels of governments when you're developing your own bioeconomy policies and strategies. Last year, as the Minister confirmed, we, at the request of the Council of the European Union, a progress report on the implementation of our strategy and the identification of the remaining gaps was produced, and it concluded that a huge amount of progress actually has been made. Many actions are on track to achieve the main objectives of the original bioeconomy strategy. In three main areas you can see significant progress. More and more member states and regions are taking ownership of the bioeconomy, developing their own strategies and policies. There's 10 member states that have dedicated bioeconomy strategies, 6 are developing them, 7 others have regional or macro-regional strategies, and there's a huge number of regions who are getting themselves organized in this sense as well. Together with the BioEast initiative, which I want to signal here, we've successfully begun to work together with our colleagues in bioeconomy development in Central and Eastern European member states, which again, it's important in itself, but in the current context, you see just how important this will be in terms of strategic autonomy, resilience, and prosperity for people. Thirdly, private investments as well as research and innovation are increasing and show promising developments in food and bio-based industries. We're seeing the de-risking and the unblocking of investment. What we need to see next is its application at more local level and the scaling of these systems changes in different places. Partnerships with public and private partners are critical to this, such as the Circular Bio-Based Europe joint undertaking, which I have the honour to co-chair, and I see Nicola and Virginia here, which are helping to make promising niche innovations to become the norm. And if you're not familiar with this, you should really go and look at it. If you want to see the extent to which innovation can give courage to policy, you see what is being created there in completely different bioeconomies around Europe and with remarkable innovation and application. First of a kind biorefineries that are leading their way across the world, new technologies, new solutions. But the progress report has also indicated that, of course, more needs to be done. There are 2 key gaps that the action plan has identified. So we need to build on what is there. But firstly, we need to better manage land and biomass demands to meet the environmental and economic requirements for a climate neutral and resilient Europe. And that word resilient means so many more things now than when we started writing the report. I know there's some very important work in the process with Alessandra's team in the JRC on that. Secondly, we need to work on more sustainable consumption patterns to ensure environmental integrity and resource efficiency. And consumption is probably the single most difficult thing in the way in which markets and societies function. And it's not going to be for men in suits from Brussels to decide on how that works, but understanding the dynamics and the incentives will be critical. So a healthy bioeconomy in brief will be critical to activating the delivery of transition in the European Green Deal. The goals and the targets that are there will need a healthy, productive, growing and integrated bioeconomy happening on the ground. And building on the results of the progress report, we continue to discuss the next steps of the European Bioeconomy Action when we met, as I said, in October. There was a huge turnout, nearly 2,000 people, one way or the other, were involved in very active discussions presently and online. Huge amount of input and feedback. We learned, I guess, the clear messages from people of all kinds who spoke from different parts of the bioeconomy, that it needs to move from being an idea to being a place. And I guess that's the critical point of our meeting here today in Arlanda. It is a means to mobilize the forces that we have in society. If we can, as Johan said at the beginning, imagine, make happen what it looks like where we live, to make where we live and work and prosper a better place. We've also learned that the international environment is changing very, very quickly. In fact, the week we had the event, China announced a bioeconomy strategy which actually wasn't translated into any other languages. I'm not sure if our machine translation got all of the individual bits, but it's telling you, you know, this is not some abstract concept. This is a major space in which all of our transitions and our competitive positions and our opportunities will be shaped. And of course, in Joseph Biden's United States, there's been a massive push now in terms of moving the bioeconomy forward. So we need a new ambition. We're leading in the European Union in this space. We understand it. We have the dynamics, we have the policy, we have the regulation, we have the people, although we need to reskill and do a lot more to bring people, as Wolfgang was saying, to integrate people into the opportunities and the value chains that can emerge, so that we don't end up, again, generating the ideas, but losing the actual opportunities. So Europe is a global leader in the bioeconomy, but we also need to cooperate with our like-minded partners, neighbours, and in particular developing countries where there's a huge challenge there. We've had great feedback from industry. It was very robust in many cases. The need to have a more enabling and coherent policy framework came to mind for the uptake and application of bio-based innovation. And from our member states, the need to streamline and synergize the bioeconomy across various instruments of the European Union. Not only the CAP, where, as Wolfgang said, huge work has been done to integrate the bioeconomy in the rural development policy, but to integrate and link across between the CAP and Horizon Europe and the cohesion funds, which of course are bottom-up. This is a really big challenge. It was also a generational event. I mean, one of the things about increasingly aging people like me talking about the future, it loses currency. One of the great things, we have our bioeconomy ambassadors who actually led the debate, who are there, and no doubt we'll be hearing from you in the course of today. I think the intergenerational aspect of this is very important. We need to turn the word hope from a concept into an actual vision of how things can be, and we need to give the voice of the next generation, I think, front and center in terms of how quickly and how urgently we need to take these things forward. So, extraordinary, if you like, culmination of the efforts of so many of you in different parts of Europe, and now here we are with the Swedish presidency putting it back on the agenda. So let's take it forward. Let's get this mission to move the bioeconomy from niche to norm, to bring it to where people live and work, to make the solutions that have been invested in and the opportunities that are there for different innovators and workers and primary producers to happen. And maybe finish with a quote from Joachim von Braun at the event, who's a great leader globally in the bioeconomy. He said that the bioeconomy is a great island of consensus in troubled times. And you can bring that to wherever you're working. I think it is absolutely true. And I hope at this conference that we agree that the bioeconomy has a lot of potential to bring us together in getting what the next step, our next future will be, into the kind of shape that we would expect it to be, despite the challenges that we're facing. At national, regional, local, European and international level, our readiness in the bioeconomy means that we can be actually optimistic about the fact that we can turn transition from a very demanding challenge into an extraordinary period of renewal and regeneration in our rural communities, in our coastal communities, our forestry communities, our cities and our industries, and particularly for those who are very much exposed to the economic difficulties of transition. But we need solutions. We need people who are skilled. We need mandates from the governments. We need mandates on the ground. And we need to identify across the way we make decisions new ways of getting these things to move forward more quickly, more systematically, wherever we're working. So no pressure. Over to you. I'm very interested to hear what all the answers are. Tack, thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was really inspiring, and I think gave us a very comprehensive overview of the whole bioeconomy as a framework, as you say, to really get all the different challenges, but also many of the opportunities that we see together into this framework. Not being a niche any longer. I mean, this has been a challenge, the green economy over there, or the bioeconomy, and then we have the rest, rather actually turning it around, and I like that. And also, of course, the whole issue of the narrative, which is extremely important, being people-centered. How can it really benefit people? So we can get people on board also, the next generation. We will have 2 of the ambassadors speaking at this conference. sometimes you meet people who really tell you that impossible is not a word that exists. I know many of you in this room are like that, but the next speaker is definitely someone like that. For quite some years ago, he took over an initiative that was launched by the government together with the private sector called Fossil Free Sweden. And we were many, including myself, who, a bit skeptical, how should this go? It's going to be a talk club again, meeting a couple of times a year and, saying that we are doing this or we're doing that. And then they got this guy on board, and now Fossil Free Sweden is something completely different. It's actually driving things. It's in the front of the debate and the agenda. Svante Axelsson, you are the coordinator and leader of Fossil Free Sweden, and tell us how you managed to get this thing really running and inspiring a lot of people, actually, what you can achieve if you just focus on solutions rather than getting stuck in the problem. So please, Svante.
Thank you.
A warm applause.
Yes. Nice to be here, and I will give you a perspective and a story how it works and how it's so easy for me. I think I have the easiest job in Sweden because so many companies and so many industrial sectors want to be in the forefront and then think it's beneficial for themselves. It's not a charity movement, it's a business. So I think, as we heard from Peter and others, we also need a story, a narrative that make it easier to get people on board, because people are now more afraid about change in the society in the short perspective than of climate change. So in that perspective, we need to give them very concrete pictures. So this journey for Fossil Free Sweden is a sort of a movement and a narrative to make strong support to the parliament, because if people see these possibilities, they don't support strong and ambitious politicians and political decisions. This initiative was to invite different sectors to produce their own roadmaps for increasing their own competitiveness. And it was very important we start with the competitiveness, because otherwise we think very darkly in our minds. But we say, how can you increase the competitiveness? By being fossil free, starting in that way. And we invited the different sectors, and I was really surprised. I need to say, stop, I can't care to take more roadmaps. So we have produced 22 roadmaps, voluntary, and they show us the story from themselves, how they want to be fossil free. They want, they can, and they will. And that was the crucial points. They show how they can and they will, if, that's important, if government reduce obstacles. So we put the pressure on the parliament. I was paid by the government, and I put the pressure on the government. It was a good solution. And they like that, because it's easier to be politicians if you have a strong choir from the industrial sectors. It's a very easy job to be a politician in this country. So that was the starting point. And we have changed the mindset. I think that's the most important thing. From this burden sharing discussion, the negotiations process, burden sharing, no one wants to take responsibility, to how we share benefits, benefit sharing instead of burden sharing. And that's very, very important to show us and others that it's not painful. So the communication is crucial. And I think there we have the biggest lack, you can say, of how we can get strong more support, because people don't really understand what's happening. And we have seen that because no one know that we have reduced our emissions so much as 33%. We have investigated this figure, and most of the people in Sweden say we're increasing the emissions, but we are going down by 33%. And the bioeconomy is the enabler in this perspective to make it possible for us. So it's very important to see it has not been painful so far. Will it be painful anytime? I don't know, because it's rather easy to transform the society from fossil energy to renewables, because we have a lot of resources. But if you look at in the individual perspective, it's of course a little bit more difficult. And that's, even here, you can say we are going in the right direction. But we can't be fossil-free as a person if we trade with countries that use fossil coal, for example. But we can see this is also a perspective that if the industrial sectors now will be fossil-free, it will become much, much easier for the individuals to also be a fossil-free person, and it's not painful. So the step now is to take the third step in our storytelling, because the first step was electrification. It's fossil-free already. The second was to make the heat sector fossil-free, and that's all more or less already done. And we've used a lot of biofuel and biomass in that sector. So the third step for us now is to make the transport sector fossil-free. And the first, of course, step in that perspective is to use a shift from fossil fuel to biofuel. And in the long run, we will see an electrification of all transports. And here we have also a lot of challenges to do. We're not so good in that perspective, but we have to even be good at to create transport efficient cities. But if we also talk in this perspective, and this today, about biomass, I think we need to see the production of biofuel as an evolution story. Because if we don't have the starting point, the first is to produce biofuel to the cars and trucks. That's the first step. The second step is to produce fuel to the aviation and shipping. And the third step is to be part of the chemistry sector, to produce green atoms. So if you don't see this as a ladder, you can say bio-ladder, you don't understand why it's so important to now get a pressure and give conditions for refineries to produce biofuels. So we don't need biofuels for car and trucks in the future, and then we need it to the aviation, and in the long run, we don't need it, perhaps, to know of them, but we need the green atoms in the chemistry. But we can't call a refinery 2035 and asking for fuels if you don't have this starting point now to produce fuels to cars and trucks. And that's, it's very, very important to understand the evolution, how this bioeconomy will develop. So here's the industrial sectors, the roadmaps. And as you see, they don't waiting. They put pressure on the government, and they are very, very impatient today because they need to step up. And that's the situation just now. They are not afraid of going too fast, but they are afraid of that it will go too slowly. As you see here, we have the forest sector, of course. We have the fossil-free agriculture sector. We have fossil-free aviation 2030 by biofuels. We have agriculture sector, fossil-free. We have others that are using biofuel or biomass in different variations. So electrification, of course, but here we have a lot of bioenergy to manage to be this fossil-free Sweden. So it has been going very well so far, but we have now some obstacles, and that's why we also need to have support from EU and also from the government to reduce obstacles. Otherwise, we couldn't manage to this 2030 and 2045. So they are very lucky, and they produce now an upgraded roadmap to show the people and themselves that it's going rather well to be in this roadmap and to produce more competitiveness by being fossil-free. And if you look at the Swedish map here, I will not say everything here, but you can see we are part of the industrial revolution. So if we go by the green mines, fossil-free iron, the fossil-free steel, we have battery factories, Northvolt, we have electrofuels in middle of Sweden, negative production of emissions in Stockholm Exergi, and we also electrification sector in the west coast of Sweden and different biorefineries. So now we have starting point, you can say, in this industrial revolution. And this is supported from many different parties and actors. And the unions is also very important in this perspective to support this. This is good for Sweden. It's not painful or we offer something. It's very, very good for our economy and for the companies. And that is the succeed, you can say, in the storytelling. And if you take a wider perspective, if you compare to other also industrial movements, to make it easier, because it sounds now to make it easier to reach our targets than we thought for some years ago, because the price is going down. Solar energy, more or less 80-90% cheaper than 2010. The same for batteries, we come back to that later. And also, of course, the wind is more or less 50% cheaper than 2010. So we have the biomass, we have the solar, we have wind, and so others, and energy efficiency, of course. So totally, it's rather easy, I would say, to solve this problem. It's more difficult to solve the biodiversity and chemistry problem, but this is not so extremely difficult. And the batteries is going down, and that's why we also have electrification in the future on tracks and cars, for example. And this is also much better than they thought from the beginning. The last perspective, I think, is the value chain. Here we have the steel example. We can talk about electric fuels. We have the forests together with the aviation companies. We need a strong collaboration between raw materials production and applications and the final consumer. And that's very, very interesting because we reduce risks when we work in this perspective. We're leaving the anonymous markets, and when we now work together and you can share risks and possibilities. And that's why it's possible to sell more expensive products when we have this collaboration and this market solution. And that will also make it easier for the whole society, because the magic thing is, of course, that when we look how the production will be more expensive in the first perspective, when we talk about fossil-free steel, it's more or less 25% more expensive, but it's just only one tire more expensive to buy that car. And the same situation here with cement is more or less 75% more expensive, but the house will not be more expensive than 1 or 2%. And I think that is very, very important storytelling, because people are afraid of changing the society, but now when they see this new logic, you can say, it's not painful to be in the forefront to develop a fossil-free Sweden. So that was a sort of story, how we communicate and how we have a very, very strong support from industrial leaders, and that make the politicians more brave, and together we dancing two for a tango. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe, I mean, if I can ask you a question, the others got away with no questions, but I would like to ask you one question. Because you did also in Fossil-Free Sweden, you did develop a particular strategy for bioresources. Can you say something about that, and how was that met? What the reactions? Are all the politicians saying, fine, we're going to do this? What are the challenges there?
It was a good question, because when we have this puzzle of 22 roadmaps, they don't fit together. We have problems with the amount of biomass, amount of electricity. It was some problems, but they are also very, you can say, they work together and they need each other. So we're starting to produce strategies to make this puzzle more acceptable. So we start to produce battery strategies. And then in that perspective, we work with the value chain. These roadmaps, they are sectors, traditional sectors, produce their own roadmap. And then we have this value chain strategies. And that was very, very successful, because then we also produce a hydrogen sector, bioeconomy sector, and even a financial sector. And now next week, we will have a seminar about this energy efficient strategy. And now we also start this bio-CCS strategy. So it was sort of, they fit together and helping each other.
But and it's because my understanding is also if you look at all the different sectors, they can all come with their demands. You can say in my sector it's going to be this much, in my sector it's going to be, and I guess this is one of the challenges we're going to discuss here. I mean, if you try to add these things together, that puts a lot of pressure on the system. Have you looked into that? I mean, if you take the sum of all the roadmaps, what happens then?
Yeah, we looked at that, and the bioeconomy strategy was very interesting because some sectors say we're leaving to use biofuels or bioenergy. The heat sector is too expensive because when the demand is increasing to produce aviation fuel, they can't pay so much for the raw material. So we have succeed, you can say, in that way that some of them is going down to demand biofuel or bioenergy, and other will increase. Many people think that we add everything to each other. That's not true. Some of them is increasing, some of them is leaving the market, and that's why it's possible to create this puzzle that we have sustainable production of biofuel.
Great. John, would you mind if coming up and see if there are any questions? I mean, I feel that you are a person that can take almost any questions, so I don't feel too worried. He's not prepared for this, but you've been sticking to time so well, so we do actually have some time for questions. If there is anything coming up, we have a microphone, I think, somewhere as well. So if there is a quick comment, it can be a comment as well. Can we have the microphone? Who has the microphone? Okay, someone.
It's here.
There's one as well, but let's take that one. There was a gentleman there in the back. So just say quickly who you are as well.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sascha Bolleman. I'm from the Netherlands, Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you both. Also to the other speakers for your introduction. I have a question to the second speaker. He said he was paid by the government to feed the parliament with information on obstacles.
Yeah.
What did you give them as input for? What kind of obstacles, and what did they do with it?
Yes, they pay me because they think it's easier to be politicians if we have a strong movement from the industrial leaders. They are not saying no now, they say yes, if. And that's another perspective. So it's much, much more pressure on the government now than for 10 years ago. And the type of obstacles you can say is, of course, we will produce much more electricity. We need permits much faster. We have lack of competence. I think that's perhaps the most important obstacle. And we need also some sort of very clear targets. And even the best thing to reduce risks is, of course, if the both part of the parliament have an agreement what they need to do and what we are going to do. Because we need a story in EU, in Sweden, that people understand and love and think, I will have a better life if we do this. And I think we're now changing in the debate in Sweden that it's not painful to be in the forefront. You lose market if you don't do it. And that's, I think, is most important, why I'm paid from the government.
Well, John, what would you say? I mean, we can see this pressure clearly from fossil-free Sweden here in Sweden. What would you say on the European level? Do we have that same strong movement from the private sector in general, trying to push for a similar agenda, you would say?
I think you have, I mean, everybody's in this bind at the moment. They have to, if you're a private sector, you have your balance sheet, you have your shareholders, and you've got an incredibly unstable, unpredictable environment. So I think what they want is they want regulatory clarity and predictability. I think we need flexibility in our regulation. This is one of the other difficult things, is how do you improvise and innovate in regulation when most of our processes are built in very transparent and predictable ways. We can sometimes have too many people asking politicians in different ways as to what they expect. And I think the politicians' task is now very difficult because they're dealing in an environment once they leave the safety of the building, which online is nothing got to do with fact. And it's why your point about messaging and clear messaging is very important. I think the sectors, I mean, the economy is still organized in representational terms, in terms of trade associations and sectors and so forth. So how do you get a systemic representation of interests and progress? It's probably easier to do it at a national level, but at the European Union level we have a Bioeconomy Alliance and so forth, but you know, certain kinds of energy producers will make their voices heard, or the farming community, and I think this is one of the challenges, and how do not just governments, but how do parliaments and organisations like ours organise themselves to be able to even receive some of the questions? Are we allowed to ask a question of the audience?
Why not? Go ahead.
My colleague from the Netherlands, I was up in the Netherlands the other day, and unfortunately a lot of my farming neighbours in the Netherlands found out that I come from Brussels, and it was quite a difficult experience. Because apparently Brussels has made a decision which doesn't involve governance anywhere else. So in the Netherlands, when you're driving along, you have these, the Dutch flags, and you have these farmers who are saying, you know, 11,000 farms have to close because of climate change. When I sat down, you know, talking to them, and saying, well, you know, where is your bioeconomy strategy in this, in terms of your medium to long-term diversification and reskilling and all the rest? So where is that, given that I've done a lot to try and ameliorate a little bit the situation? How does that fit?
You want to, yeah, please.
Thank you. That's a good question, because actually we have a national bioeconomy strategy from 2018, but it's almost 5 years old. So, and at that time we had a bioeconomy department within the Ministry of Economic Affairs. However, now some things changed. Agriculture is now a separate ministry again. We have some circular bio-based vision within the Ministry of Infrastructure. So what we are doing now currently is to kind of rebuild the bioeconomy group from all members of the different ministries, and to renew our strategy, and also to look which ministry or which minister is feeling like responsibility for this, because it's not only agriculture. It's as you know, it's so broad. But of course, farmers, they can benefit a lot. And last thing I would like to say is that we are currently working on a agricultural agreement together with the sector, the agricultural sector. It's an ongoing process. It has to end at the end of April, and bio-based products and bioeconomy is also a part of this agreement. So, well, that's all I can say. So. But there are rough times now because of the nitrogen and derogation.
Okay, so real politics meets ambitions. It's interesting, when Fossil-Free Sweden started, at least, it was the Prime Minister who actually launched it. So it was really at the highest political level. Any other comment or questions? Yes, there is one over here, two over here. So let's take two more, and then we're going to have a coffee break.
As farmers were mentioned, maybe I need to say something as well. So my name is Juana Nagu. I represent the European Farmers and Agri-Cooperatives based in Brussels, and we are one of the members also of the European Bioeconomy Alliance. And some of my colleagues are here as well from the Alliance. We are, I think now, 15 European organizations who joined forces to promote bioeconomy. One of the points that you have mentioned, Mr. John Bell, in your presentation is the policy coherence. And I think most of the people today in the room, they really believe in bioeconomy. But I think we still have people in Brussels that after so many years, they still don't believe in it, or it's even getting worse, I would say. And what can we do? What can we do? I mean, also now on the next steps, we know that in the progress report, one of the elements that was mentioned is the environmental sustainability of the bioeconomy, linked also to biodiversity. What can be done from the policy coherence as well? Because we see that we go very much in the direction of biodiversity. Maybe climate, it's sometimes missing from the discussion, and we think that there is a big missed opportunity if we forget that bioeconomy plays an important role also on the environmental sustainability in tackling climate change, but also addressing growth, competitiveness that was mentioned today. I think, and this is a big maybe challenge also for the Swedish presidency, how we can address this aspect. And to be really honest, and I don't know if there is somebody here today from the European Commission from the DG Environment part, but yeah, we need to have a very open discussion, and I'm happy that you have the Swedish presidency put it back, this topic on the table, because it is the moment to discuss. If we don't do it, communication is key, and open communication and trust is key. So yeah, I will highly appreciate a first reaction from your side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I take one more, and then I will bring you Lena?
Thank you very much for very interesting comments. I think that what we need to discuss when it comes to these topics is also the social problems that we have in Europe. Those who are providing what we need in the bioeconomy, and the growing poverty, and the feeling in rural areas that they are left out, and we will never solve this if we cannot address also the social problems. And my second comment is a lot of the proposals that's coming from the Commission is actually adding heaps of bureaucracy. It seems like the fossil industry's best technology now to stop the bioeconomy and to diminish the climate emissions is adding bureaucracy proposals on everything that we want to do when it comes to bioeconomy. And this is, of course, a real difficulty when you're dealing with legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Lena Ek, you will be speaking after the break, coffee break as well. So please, if you have any comments. So policy coherence is, of course, a huge issue in terms of all the different DGs, for instance, as well. Do we add a lot of bureaucracy in all this, and the social dimensions? I think you have talked about quite a lot as well, the work, creating new jobs and economy and so on. But please, some comments on this.
Well, maybe just to come back, I mean, if I had the solution to all the problems in the farming sector, the challenges, then I would be well, I'd probably have a saint to it, or what the equivalent is in the secular world nowadays. But what I do think what Svante was saying at the beginning, I mean, one of the dynamics here is to state what people want. You know, freedom it functions in different ways, freedom from and freedom to. And at the moment, people are in the freedom from category. They see these huge problems that are very practical problems at a very local level. And the bioeconomy opportunity, I mean, it's a very big word, but if you bring it down, you know, the deal that society has to make to have the countryside and to have the ecology and to have the services and to have the sequestration and to have the clean water and to have the food and to have the energy and to have all of these things, there needs to be a new social contract with the countryside. But there has to be two sides to that, and one of that, and I'm not saying this is what the farming community have to do, what the farming community needs to say, this is what we need and what we want. You want us to deliver this, then this is what we need on the other side. And the other side has to include, you know, what Wolfgang said. You need value chains that are functioning. You need markets where, I mean, you've seen it. If farmers find themselves in the position of milk farmers over the last 20 years, when the money in the value chain is going somewhere else, so there are market dysfunctions. There's a few things you need to put together and say, this is what we want, as distinct from this is what we don't want. And I think that is a much more positive way of demanding the reskilling, the investment that's necessary, looking at the regulatory things across the board. I think this is one of the issues, Johan, and in the Parliament, Lena, you know, well, the Parliament has to show its parliamentary sovereignty by improving very often the legislation that's there. And it's only when you actually have an overarching strategic objective that people can judge it against that. The bioeconomy tends to be collateral damage sometimes in other discussions. And that's why you need to have, a bit like the point that was made earlier on, you need to have a bioeconomy understanding of, for our bioeconomies to function, either we need to be left alone in certain areas, or we need them to take consideration in terms of coherence and regulation here, 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 and here. But at the present moment, whether you're dealing with, you know, energy provision or competitiveness or all of the impacts of the war in Ukraine, which is taking up most people's bandwidth politically, or you're dealing with getting to the climate targets or the existential threats that are there, until you have it up at that level. So, for example, until you have, do we want as a society to have a rurally regenerated community in part of our society as a key part of our civilization? That's the question. It's not about food production or agriculture production, and everything else flows from that. And I think that means and I think you're seeing it. I saw it certainly in the Netherlands in terms of the new political parties that are emerging. You know, if people don't find their voice in the political spectrum, they will find it. And so I think that what Svante said at the beginning, what is the ask in terms of making the transition happen? And I think that's an opportunity that's definitely there. And for the rest of us, regulatory coherence is, and we have a big regulatory impact board. We've got lots of people whose job it is to do that. But, you know, policies, they leave the house, they get debated, and different things happen to them.
That's for sure. Yes, and a short.
Yes, I would just agree. I mean, we have now seen a lot of increasing attention when we go from theory to practice. And I think it's a good sign. If we have conflicts, we are doing something. We are in that phase now. But we also need to discuss the distributional effects, because when we change in society, we have a different burden if you have a very, very huge distributional gap. So I think we need to discuss regional economy as a whole to make this transition more suitable. The other thing, I think, the highest risk, we talk about obstacles, the highest risk to making this transition is the language from Brussels about biofuels and bioenergy. Is it bad or not? And I mean, it's for me, it's very, very interesting discussion if we can see differences if we take fossil energy instead of taking rest products from this cold circle, the natural cold circle. So, I mean, if we don't have managed to solve that discussion, it's a very, very high risk for all investors now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking some time in this spontaneous Q&A. You weren't prepared for it, but I felt that we had some time, so that was excellent. We all deserve coffee now. In Sweden, everybody, you know that. We get very nervous if we don't get our coffee breaks. And sometimes I know that, you know, they get nervous if there is a moderator who doesn't understand that we need a coffee break. So I do understand that we need a coffee break, so don't worry about it. So half an hour, we are going to be back 3:15. So welcome back. in you, because we now have a really interesting session. We're going to have two speakers first to give us two keynotes. Then we're going to have our youth ambassador also to share some reflections, maybe some critical questions as well, to the panel discussion. And before that, we're going to have also 3 industry examples. So it's going to be what we call in Swedish a smorgasbord of very interesting dimensions and perspectives coming in here. I'm very pleased to introduce, first of all, Alessandra Sampieri, the Director for Director of Sustainable Resources at the Joint Research Center, Bioeconomy in the EU, Trends and Perspective. Give her an applause, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here because, as we said, it's a very timely conference, and because I am very happy to see that you also invite science to these events, so I could be happier than this, of course. Where am I? I am the Director responsible for sustainable resources at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. This is a research organization directly inside the European Commission. We do carry out research to feed and to help policymakers. This is our primary role, to make sure that the policies that are developed are based on sound data and sound research results. And we do in many different fields. We have many researchers, almost 3,000 people in different fields. And bioeconomy is one of these fields. And it is particularly important because, as we have heard until now, and as you all know, because you work in this sector, bioeconomy is a complex issue. And it's a complex issue also because there are very many different sectors on bioeconomy, and these sectors very often have different perspectives, different logics, and because there are differences in the member states in their historical, cultural, economic situations. So it's even more important that all this is based on sound data and sound research results. And this is what we are trying to do. And we are very happy when we see that our work is appreciated, known, and useful. We do this, we do research, and we present the results of our work in very many different ways. And if you know a bit the Joint Research Center, you're certainly visiting one of our many websites. One of the ways we do this work is through knowledge centers. Knowledge centers are virtual places where science meets policy virtually. Sometimes we meet physically. And we make the results of our research, but also the research and the data that we collect from others, we put it in the same place and we make it available freely online to many stakeholders and operators. Sometimes we also have meetings behind closed doors, but our philosophy is really to make this available. And one of these knowledge centers is the Knowledge Center on Bioeconomy, which I have the pleasure to co-chair together with John Bell there. We co-chair the steering group, but we work together with other Directors-General inside the European Commission because I said policy and research, what we do must serve the policies. Policy in drafting, monitoring inside the European Commission, but also for all member states. You must have been seeing this, you must have been working with us. We collect the data, we make the data available, we synthesize the knowledge, we try to actionize the knowledge, to have actionable results that you can use in your daily work. But of course, we also like to have some scientific discussions with the scientists, and you will see the results of all this work in a sec. Not only you have all that information in the Knowledge Center, but today for this conference, we have prepared 3 reports, and they have been delivered this morning. So if you have a Twitter account, follow me because they are all there. I tweeted them this morning, and I will tweet again this afternoon after my presentation. You will find the link to this first 2 because the third, we are still putting the affiliations right. It will be issued later this week. The first one is trends in the EU bioeconomy. The second is the supply uses and flows of biomass in the European Union. And the third is a super interesting report that has been drafted mainly by external scientists for us. But the speech for me today is really linked to the trends in bioeconomy. This is a bit the heart of the presentation today. And what I've been doing in this report, we have been monitoring the progress towards the different political objectives of the EU bioeconomy in the 5 sectors. And you will find data in this report, data that have also been informing the progress report that John mentioned before. You will find strategies of the various member states in Europe. You will find innovation approaches, and most of all, you will find the EU Bioeconomy Monitoring System. The Joint Research Center was given the task in the strategy in 2018 strategy to monitor bioeconomy. And this is what you will find here. We have developed this monitoring system, and we have done it in collaboration with many stakeholders. We have developed the indicators that you find here. Many of them have been developed by us, but some of them have also been developed by the European Environmental Agency or by other stakeholders. And all this presents this monitoring system that we use to monitor the trends toward implementing the objective. How far are we from meeting the objectives? Now, quickly, the first objective is linked to ensuring food and nutrition security. And you see that food availability, no surprise, is generally stable in Europe, although there are differences between the member states. But overall, the trend of biomass directly consumed as food is in general stable. So good news here. The second objective is managing natural resources sustainably. And overall, the biomass production from agriculture, fisheries, and forestry is increasing. The pressure from managing forestry and agriculture are increasing, while the pressure from fisheries is decreasing. This is good news, and here in the graphs that you see, we try to put, in general, the good news coming from this monitoring system. So here we put the good effect of the common fisheries policy that having good effect here on fisheries. The third objective is linked to reducing the dependency on non-renewable and sustainable resources. And here, the trends for resource and energy efficiency are largely positive. This is, of course, positive. The fractional bio-waste recovery has been increasing. And the total consumption of biomass for energy and materials is increasing constantly in this past decade. All this information, of course, you will find in the report, and you will have all the data and all details. So while this has been relatively stable or positive messages, here it has been much more difficult to find a positive message because mitigating and adaptation to climate change, which is the first objective, see as a result of our analysis that there is a slight worsening in the emissions from the agriculture sector. The trend in the LULUCF sector is more worrisome because the forest sink has been shrinking since 2013, and because, as we know very well, particularly those living in the Mediterranean region, there are water stresses conditions. So overall, this objective needs some more work to become a bit more positive. The last objective, the last one, is linked to the European competitiveness and creating job, the economic part of the economy. And here we see positive developments because biomass producing activities are stable, and most positive and dynamic trends can be observed for more recent bio-based industrial activities related to chemical, pharmaceutical, plastics, and the energy-oriented bio-based sectors. If we zoom in specifically in this sector, we can see that in 2020, during the COVID pandemics, the bioeconomy share of the EU workforce remained stable. And this is good news because the sector showed more resilience than other sectors. It was stable around 8.3%, and bioeconomy share of the total EU GDP kept a share of around 4.9. And as you can see, resilience compared to other sectors was better in this sector, and also no surprise, taking into account the production and the continuous work that's kept also during the pandemic in the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector showed resilience, which was even stronger. Now, all this data, as I said, you will see in the report, but if you want to have a sort of graphic representation of what I've been telling you, this is more or less how we could sum up the situation. You see the yellow and green arrows are good, are stable or improving trends and meeting the objectives, while the red arrows, no, I don't need to explain this, are sectors which requires still some work. It's the environmental challenging persist, in fact, and they point to a need for policy coordination. And here, you are the policymakers. It's your task to draw the conclusions on this and to design policies accordingly. My role is to show you the figures and the results of our research and put the data at your disposal. However, most of these reports are drafted together with the policymakers in the Commission, our colleagues in our Directorate-General, and therefore some of the conclusions here are shared and drafted by them. This was the first report, and now we move to the second report that we also published today, is the biomass supply and uses. In 2014, the Joint Research Center was asked to look into the question of biomass supply and demand from a cross-sectorial perspective. The demand for biomass is increasing worldwide, and all sectors know and are looking into this issue of how it is produced, where it is produced, and how it is consumed. And we have therefore carrying out this analysis, this research, and today we present these results that show how the biomass supply and uses are developing, and this is the picture that we can present today, where we see that there is a share of supply, there is the order of magnitude of share of supply of uses of biomass. In green, you see here the sourcing, roughly 1 billion tons in dry matter of biomass. And you see also how it is distributed, the agriculture sector representing 50% with the crops, and the forestry 27%. The biomass uses is increasing, is growing. We saw it in the previous slide, and it is bigger than the supply. It is 1.2 billion tons, and we can consume that amount because of the recovery of the waste. And this is a sector which is helping and which is increasing and which is enhancing the production, so the productivity. So this is how we are able to use more biomass than what we produce. And here too, we can zoom in the contributions from agriculture, the animal feeding and bedding representing 40%, but I'm not going to read you all the figures because they are very well represented there. Finally, the third report, why is it interesting? Because here we also collected different views and collecting the voices of those who are less represented in these conferences or in the mainstream around bioeconomy, those who have different views. And we collected the scholars, we put them together, and we asked them to come up with an idea of bioeconomy, their idea of bioeconomy. And this is a very interesting also anticipation and foresight component, looking at bioeconomy and looking also at the equity and the social fairness linked to the bioeconomy, to a different kind of consumption and different society. Interesting because, as I said, it could be also one line of consideration for future foresight. And this helps me also to conclude my presentation saying that what we plan to do at the Joint Research Center to continue to serve you, policymakers, and the communities is, first of all, to continue to monitor and to carry out the task given to us, continue to monitor and produce the evidence, to measure, because we must be able to measure and to put figures on these policies, but also we want to anticipate, look ahead, and look at the parts and the sectors of the bioeconomy that are not fully exploited yet. So keep following us, because we will come up with more data, more information, more research results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. You will come back in the panel. I'm sure there are going to be questions. Very interesting to hear, based on science and facts, but also in close interaction with policymakers and other key actors in society. I think there are quite a few questions there, I'm sure. I'm very pleased to now introduce our second speaker, Ms. Lena Ek, now heading the Inquiry for National Bioeconomy Strategy. You're in the middle of that work, I think, more or less.
Yes.
Which is very interesting, of course. But you also are a former Minister for the Environment. You have been in the European Parliament. You have also been
7 years.
Chair of the Board of Södra. So you have that experience from policy, from business, from the national level, from the European level. And I think that is clearly very relevant for us here today. So the role of the bioeconomy today, Lena, please, a warm applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. I recognize some of you who are still here in the discussion group 7 years after, so many years since I left the European Parliament. It's so nice to see you again. Yes, if you've heard Svante introducing the sort of diplomatic way of dealing between legislative work and the industry, my job in the inquiry is to look at what is hampering the development of bioeconomy and what kind of risks are we facing when you want to invest. And we're just in the middle. We are supported by the former government and the current government, and we are publishing our first report in 1 month and the second report in 6 months. So we're looking into what is happening in Belgium or Netherlands or those other countries that are working with this, and of course the JRC. This is a slide that starts 1990, famous year of UN statistics for climate. And in the middle somewhere, I spent 7 years in the European Parliament. I negotiated the third energy market package in REACH and things like that. And surprisingly little has happened. All those years, all those debates, all those decisions, and surprisingly little has happened. And of course, the green is the renewables, and it ends in 2020. Source Eurostat. I think from the public debate, one would think that much more has changed during these years. But basically, not much, except in some countries. And you see here the biomass increasing in Sweden. This is 71 to 2019. You see the gray field, crude oil and petroleum products going down. And here is a change. And why is that? Well, I think Sweden has had 3 energy shocks. First World War, Second World War, and the big oil crisis. And Svante mentioned that when he talked. And that means that we have invested, first of all, to change and get out of fossils in the heating sector. And if you look at this right now, this is 2002 till last year, or 2021. Local district heating, the yellow field, is basically biomass, biomass in direct heating, electrical heating, and fossil oil is almost gone from the heating sector. And that is one way of explaining the use of bioeconomy, and that change is possible. And again, I'm referring back to what Svante said. It could actually increase the economic development and the social situation in a country to move from fossils to bio. Now, why is this? Why could we do? Well, yes, a little bit more detailed on what the government asked for us is to see, can we do the same thing in electricity production and in transport? So that's what we're working with currently. And of course, it provides the same challenges as in the heating sector. And as Johan correctly asked, will there be enough? And I think it will, because of two factors. First, increased production of biomass in a sustainable way. Secondly, much more smarter use than today. Well, this is we have biogas, biodiesel, bioethanol, and as you see, biodiesel is currently the most used. Now, I will concentrate on forest, and I will explain why. But in the coming 6 months, we will look into these questions in the same way when it comes to agriculture, aquaculture, of course, household waste, and industrial residues and waste. But we're starting with forest, and that has a very natural explanation, this map. Why do we have so much forest in Sweden? And actually, it increased every year since 1903 in number of stems and in volume, except for the year of the huge storm Gudrun. And as you see, there's a huge difference in coverage in different member states of different parts of the European Union. Huge difference. And I can understand why in negotiations the Netherlands or Belgium or Luxembourg has very different views on forestry than what we have in Sweden. And why did it change from 1903? Well, it was the whole country was virtually, the forest was cut down, and there was a law introduced that said if you cut, you have to plant. And that is roughly 120 years earlier than the European Commission said the same thing. So legislation has an impact, and the will to do things has an impact. And of course, we would like the rest of Europe to replant. I think roughly we have a little bit more than, for one cut, you have to plant 3. And you have to plant a variety, and most of this forest land is voluntarily environmentally certificated, which means that every forester, being it a small farmer or a big industry, follows roughly 250 criteria when managing their forest. And this is something we would like to see in the rest of Europe as well, of course. So that is why we're concentrating on forest. That's why we use this in district heating a lot. And we still manage to increase the volume in stems and volumes every year, even though we use it so much. We follow this to the detail. And you see the yearly growth, and you see what is sustainable felling volume. And this is strictly controlled by the State Agency for Forestry. And there is a huge potential still. We know that from the allowed felling, we could use the long stems, we could use the short ones, and we could use the extras, branches and tops. And this is just looking at the volume available in branches and tops, the leftovers. The efficiency that could be added still to what we are doing. And you see there's a huge volume for this, and this is what we are aiming to use for biofuel and for bioeconomy. So we know that we have a huge margin, we know that we are doing this sustainably, and we know that we have a potential here. I don't think we will use all of it, but certainly we will use part of it. Why are there so many leftovers? Well, of course, in the forest, when you cut the branches and the tops, as I mentioned, but also when you do things like the big German proposal or initiative on Bauhaus, when you cut it up, you have leftovers also in the big stems. because it's round and you need square planks. And this has been a problem from an environmental point of view for decades. But now it's worth money because we know that we can do a lot of very good things with all these leftovers. And this slide I could have called Why I Hate the Cascading Principle. And I think one could make a comparison with the music industry. If legislators or politicians would decide how you would listen to music, maybe we would still be, on this floppy disk time that we had once in our youth. This is not everything that we could take out of a tree and that we're not doing currently. Part of it we're doing, some things we're not. Paper, of course, you all know all this. Textiles, a very new thing. And here you could also circulate this fiber again and again and again. Composites, hemi-products, bark that is now not used to its full potential. There's a lot of very expensive things in bark that could be developed. Lignin. And then we could add energy, transport, biofuel to this map. And what I would, after 7 years in the parliament and one period as a minister, I would not like Brussels to decide which part is the best according to Brussels. Because I think that this is something for the market, for the research and development. And what I see is a huge development on innovation right now for all these new products and many more. And without needing for us to cut above limits or what we're not allowed from a sustainable point of view in this country. It's recycling, it's using, it's extracting, it's huge possibility. And I think I could do the same kind of map when it comes to agriculture or aquaculture. And that is what we're doing in our inquiry the coming 6 months. So, you're from the agriculture, don't fear. Possibilities are there, innovation is there. It's very good that the European Union is working with the sustainable bioeconomy. I think it should be a lot tougher. I think we are sort of walking back or bending over from the demands from the fossil industry. And this is very dangerous. And that means, if we look at the European bioeconomy and we look at the Swedish bioeconomy, or the French or the German or the Romanian, it's different. Should be allowed to be different. Should be allowed to be different. And when we look into the global challenges that we face, from climate, from biodiversity, hunger, and the terrible war that Russia has launched on Ukraine, what has Ukraine except from land? Corn, minerals, energy, all those things. And what we see, why is China expanding if we're talking geopolitics globally? Food, minerals, energy. So the differences that we have in the European member states is something that works as a strength for us and that we need to be careful to preserve and to use in cooperation, not creating a costume that fits all. Now, our job in the governmental inquiry is, of course, to promote bioeconomy and do this in an environmentally friendly way. See, too, that we don't overstep the borders, that we are careful, that we work with the regulation we have, and, of course, then, that we also create jobs and economy, and what is added today that hasn't always been discussed in this concept, national security. Security issues are growing, the demand is, or rather, the fear that people feel in the European Union today on these multiple crises and challenges We have to provide solutions, and we have to build from where people stand and where they are and what they recognize to be able to provide that strength that is needed to build this society that we all need so much. As I started to say that we work with forestry, we work with transport, but in order to get the innovations that we need to be sure that the industry and the investors are feeling okay with the money they spend. And there are, of course, political risks, economical risks, market risks when you discuss investments. And that is why we are now focusing a little bit more than maybe the government anticipated on the intermediate. Because we know if we're moving in transport, finally, to green electricity, not only electricity, green electricity, my friends. We know that maybe the use for biofuel for transport, for normal cars or so, will finally fade out. Then you have to have the possibility to change your industry, maybe after 5 years, if you're optimistic, if 10 years or 15 years, to make something else. So when we're talking about support systems, it's not only the end product, we also need to focus on the intermediate, where you have the crude bio-oil and where you can choose what kind of product you want to make from this crude bio-oil. And I think this is a new way of thinking to provide more security, better for those who finance, but also for us who want to, in different sectors, take out the fossils. And from the intermediates, it could be biofuels, but it could also mean plastics, textiles, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, a new ear maybe for someone, a new battery for someone, new packaging for someone, heat and power or other products. And I think this readability to be able to see that there is change in innovation and development has to be there in the support systems that we create in Europe, European Union, but also nationally. And that is how we work, and we are convinced that this is the future and the path from fossil dependency and stronger and better security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. I will welcome you back in the panel. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions for you as well. It's interesting.
Do you really
I
think so?
do think so. And it's inspiring to always listen to you. But it's also fascinating to hear what, as you say, I mean, we don't really know what the solutions will be. What is there in the future? How we can have the flexibility as well. So that's really key. Why don't we listen to industry now then? Can I ask my industry colleagues to join me here on stage? We have Annika Bresky, the CEO of Stora Enso. They are, among other things, I couldn't help say that, the sponsors of the World Championship in cross-country skiing right now. And for us, of course, you know, it's, yes, important, isn't it? Yeah. But I would like to also my other colleagues to join me as well. Christoph Michalski, from the CEO of Billerud, and Agnes Borg, where do you have Agnes? Agnes is over there, who is the Director for Industrial Biotechnology at Europa Bio, which is the European Association for Bioindustries. So we're going to hear some practical examples now, how the bioeconomy is really playing out in your respective businesses. So please, start with you.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. How do we live in a bioeconomy? And first of all, I would really like to thank the Swedish presidency for really arranging this event and this conference to prioritize bioeconomy. I do believe that we can all agree that bioeconomy is key to achieving the objectives of the European Green Deal. And as Lena showed, there are many things we can do with wood. This is one example. For those of us, or you, who don't know Stora Enso well enough, we are a European-based company with a global footprint. We employ 18,000 people across EU. And we are represented in all the sectors that were mentioned here. We are big forest owners, one of the largest private forest owners globally, but we also are represented in the full value chain that Lena was discussing here. And therefore, we have a renewable product perspective guided by the cascading principles. Our products include wooden building materials as well as everyday paper packaging, for instance, but also more innovative materials like biochemicals. And I will today in my speech focus on what we primarily grow in the forest, which is materials for construction. And simply put, as a company, we work every single day to replace fossil-based materials with renewable ones. If we now look, you see the same slide a little bit different than Lena presented, but in short, you can say that in the forest, the main part of the tree, we grow buildings, wooden-based buildings. And then we use the residues, as Lena pointed out, to make other products out of it. And we choose it so that we create the best resource efficiency, but also societal value. And in some details, you can say that the thickest part of the tree trunk becomes a construction material of different sorts for houses and furnitures, long-lived materials, where the CO2 is stored for a long time. The thinner parts is used for pulp making, where we create packaging, and my colleague here, Christophe, will share with you a little bit more on the packaging side. And the branches and tops, along with other residues, they are used for different end uses such as bioenergy or biochemicals. So nothing is wasted. And I think that is really important to understand the best use for value and the best use for in terms of resource efficiency. And even the sawn dust that we have and the bark are used in our operations. So one tree has many products. All of these products are intertwined. You can't just choose one and then leave the others away, because then you create a lot of waste. And because growing trees, they absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, products that derive from wood-based materials, they continue to store carbon, not only when they are used in recycling, but the more long-lived products we have, the more we also keep the CO2 locked in the system. And all of these products and the raw material, like Lena showed here, they are sourced from Europe. And I do believe that we have learned our lesson after the COVID disruptions and the war that Russia started in Ukraine, how important it is to be resilient and to have supply chains that can counteract these disruptions. Now, these are some interesting facts here that you can see in terms of construction that I will focus on in my speech. Bio-based materials in construction, they have a double advantage. They allow not only for the development of a fully European supply chain, we grow the wood here, the construction industry can use this wood, but they often also offer an opportunity to address resource scarcity and to reduce emissions. The building sector today is largely unsustainable. 40% of the materials it consumes are virgin materials. And globally, buildings and construction stand for 37% of the energy and process-related CO2 emissions. And this was for 2021. So it's clear to say here that unless we want this to continue, we have to tackle the challenge for transition in construction industry. And the construction ecosystem is built around incumbent materials such as concrete and steel. They are high intensity products in terms of CO2. With building regulatory systems, they are quite conservative in nature. It means that they are tried and tested for fossil-based materials like concrete and steel. And they dominate still the university education, they dominate the industry practices and the ways of working that the construction industry has. And therefore, for me at least, it's not surprising to see that we make such short or small improvements, as Lena very well showed in her kind of presentation. Why are we not proceeding faster? And I believe that the gap where we are and where we need to be is widening, unfortunately, despite the number of new constructions that are being made. And I believe also it's a missed opportunity, and a strong driver is needed in order to decarbonize the building sector and to push for this transition for sustainable materials. And I believe this is where EU can play a very important role, and where EU policies can open up opportunities, for instance, for wood, and for wood to be the material of choice. It is important that we look at our cities and transforming our cities from carbon sources to carbon sinks. I think this becomes very clear if we look at the whole life cycle of carbon, and we need to look at emissions from the whole value chain perspective, from the moment that we grow the tree in the forest, the CO2 it absorbs there, and how long it's then stored as a material in a building. And this can be done by focusing on something that's called embodied carbon. It includes the emissions from the producing of the building materials, but also the construction process itself. And reducing this embodied carbon helps us achieve very strong climate benefits. Choosing a wooden frame, for instance, over a steel frame or a concrete frame means that these emissions can never occur. And the wood will store the carbon that is removed from the atmosphere. I believe that wood is perfectly suited to be an efficient and safe construction. It's lightweight. It's up to 80% of on-site logistical and transport emissions can be saved. Additionally, the lightweight enables faster and quieter assembly processes, something that is very difficult to do in cities. And last but not least, looking at the market share of timber, these are depressing numbers that I will say now. It's only 2.4% in EU that's used by wood. In the member states, the countries consuming most timber is Sweden and Finland, 11% respectively, 8%. And therefore, we in Stora Enso, we are really excited about the Bauhaus, European Bauhaus initiative, and connecting that to the European Green Deal. And we are a proud official friend of this initiative and want to showcase all the benefits that wood has. Already today, mass timber can replace a lot of concrete and steel. But I would like to finish here with a plea. We know we can construct buildings that are up to 26-story highs. We have a lot of innovation in this sector. We can measure the CO2 that is stored in the material. But if we are to reduce the emissions from construction, we need a whole life carbon and embodied emissions to be integrated in EU policies. And to be more concrete, on the demand side, we want this life carbon cycle to be included in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the EPBD, as this can and must be a powerful means for decarbonizing the building sector. And we also want, on the supply side, the Construction Products Regulation, CPR. This is a key regulation. And for the first time, we will see that the environmental sustainability and the whole life carbon is integrated into construction legislation, which is really important to drive the shift. Both the EPBD and the CPR need to recognize the climate benefits provided by the long-term carbon storage of wood products, and for example, by referring it to the proposed EU carbon removal certification. This framework is key to ensure that the value of long-term carbon storage is provided by wooden buildings and would also incentivize this transformation for wooden frame buildings. to decarbonize our building sector and to reach the Paris Agreement, to reduce the waste of limited resources and to invest in European-sourced renewable materials, wood construction is the future. So, dear politicians, dear officials listening to this, you have the tools to really create change in your hands. I would urge you to use them to their fullest extent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Then I ask Christoph, please.
Yes, thank you. So I can promise you when you leave tonight, you will know how a tree is used. Because I will now show you a third interpretation of this afternoon, how this is done. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak to you, and thank you to the Swedish presidency. Not many of you will know Billerud. We are basically a paper maker and packaging maker. And we have a business in Sweden and Finland. And also, as Annika mentioned, now we have a business in the US because we believe in short supply chains and we want to be there for our customers. So here's my tree. I will not go in detail, just remember I'm using the middle part plus all the chips that comes from Annika's sawmills and also some of the sawdust for biofuels and things like that. But I want to talk a little bit more about the paper. So how do you make paper? I guess not many of you don't know how that is done. So basically we take the forest, the pulpwood out of the forest, we chip it, we put it in a digester, we make pulp out of it, and basically when you make pulp, on one hand you end up with a lot of fibers, and on the other hand you end up with lignin and a lot of chemicals, which basically use for energy. You recycle the chemicals, and then the process starts again. So it's a very sustainable process because all the trees, as Lena pointed out, are basically regrown. And when I see a slide which says the forest is a problem at the European level, I feel that in Sweden this is not the case, and the area where this might be a problem, like biodiversity, a lot of work is going on, in particular in certification, in order to reassure the biowood. Then basically there's a lot of energy left, and you mentioned district heating. We are participating in some municipalities where our factories are close to like Gävle, close to urbanization, where we basically provide the district heating. There's a lot of paper coming out, which is fantastic for packaging. And then we use the energy, the surplus energy from the pulp making to actually run our machines, okay? We are 97% fossil free. We basically nearly use no fossils in that process. And the only time we use it is when we start up some of these big boilers. And by 2025, I hope Billerud will be relatively fossil free because we are all working using biofuel in order to do that. Then the paper is sold to our customers. They're making packaging out of it, corrugated board, boxes, whatever you have. It goes to the consumer and then gets recycled. And it can get recycled many times. So for the moment in Europe it's about 3.5 times, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be 9 or 10. And basically you need a lot of new primary fiber going into the cycle over time in order to keep the process efficient. So recycling is one of the key arguments that we need to promote with our consumers. Industrial waste gets generally well recycled. It's more on the consumer side. At the basis of this is actually very good forest management. And Lena, you mentioned that already, so I will be fast. So 3/4 of the forest in Sweden is basic productive land, and of which 1% is harvested every year, okay? And that is because, because of that, actually there's more forest in Sweden since 1903, which I learned today, and today the Swedish forest is very healthy and has a growing base. 1/4 is not touched at all. It's either a normally protected area, or it's non-productive forest, or it's let aside because in the certification progress, you want to have biodiversity zone like around rivers, etc. And you have a lot of smaller forest owner who actually put also voluntary forest on the side. So that is the situation. So it's a very vibrant forest in Sweden, Finland, and Norway. and it absorbs a lot of carbon, 36 million tons a year. And if you compare that to a forest of a similar size, Alaska, which is not exploited, that forest only absorbs about 17 million carbon tons of CO2, which gives you an idea. A managed forest is a fantastic tool to recycle carbon on a permanent basis. Good, so here virgin versus recycled fiber, very important. So recycled fibers can be recycled indefinitely. I said that already. And therefore you need a good balance between virgin fiber into the cycle and in order to continue the cycle. Virgin fibers have a great quality differentiation. They're much stronger because they're virgin. They're very good for strength. And secondly, they're basically untouched. So therefore, for food-touching products, they are much better when it comes to food safety requirements. 82% of paper is recycled. Probably 100% of office paper is recycled. So a lot of that gap are consumers, which we need to encourage to bring day in and day out their products to the recycling station. Good. Here I want to give you just a simple example. You talked about already the life cycle of products, and the life cycle of products goes from cradle to grave, of taking a wood out of the forest, bring it in our factory, transforming it, making a product out of it, filling it, and then bringing it back in its recycling, etc. And if you compare a simple beverage carton like the soy milk presented outside, you will find that the beverage carton has by far the better CO2 footprint than any other packaging solution. I will not say that only beverage carton is the solution for any kind of packaging, but when it comes to certain application, you have to choose the right packaging materials, and a lot of brand owners actually have started to do that. What you should not do, and that is now a question also to those in the room who do regulation, you cannot use one size fits all. You cannot say always packaging on carton is bad because there's a bit of plastic, it's still recyclable, but compared to a PET bottle, even if you recycle it, it's not as good, and a glass reusable bottle even performs less good. So there are different applications, and therefore horses for courses, it's an important concept when we do these decisions. Secondly, packaging materials only 3.5% of the footprint when it comes to food, for example, when it comes to the overall product. And therefore, it is important that we use the right packaging material for the right thing. So for example, here's an example of very good longer shelf life when you package fruit and vegetables in cartons rather than in plastic containers. Okay? Just a comparison what it does. And protecting or increasing shelf life by 49%, i.e. creating less food waste, is not even included in the number of your beverage carton or whatever carton you have measured. Okay? Lower carbon footprint, we do a lot of business. We're developing with Amazon, doing e-com bags. And here's an example of the lower carbon footprint of a of a paper bag compared to a PE bag, which the same transport strength and the same protection to the product or the book or the record you put inside. And then finally, waste. You all know there are huge islands, the size of a continent in the Pacific Ocean of plastic. Okay? Paper doesn't do that. Paper packaging, worst case scenario, doesn't get recycled, ends up somewhere and will disintegrate in a relatively short timetable. We have even products where you put the paper bag into the process and have zero waste, because this is a cement sack bag, for example, which is just absorbed in the concrete making and basically disappears with us and is then carbon storaged to some extent as we go forward. So very, very important to understand that different packaging has different benefits, and paper is a great one because it's renewable, it's recyclable, has lower carbon footprint, and create much less waste. Good, what's next? What's next is actually a very challenging industrial challenge. And that is clearly our factories also create a lot of carbon by producing, it's just biogenic carbon. So you could argue, well, within 25, 40 years in Sweden, the tree will have grown back and your carbon is absorbed. But is that good enough? Because CO2 is CO2. And we are working on many, as the industry is working on many solutions, as you have seen this morning with the energy providers, on how can we capture the carbon, how can it be used, how can it be stored. And our issue is generally not the technology per se. That technology exists. It has two challenges. First, it uses some energy in order to capture the carbon. And secondly, we need to create the business models around so that basically someone pays for this additional activity. Clearly, our margins are not very high in packaging, and therefore we need business models. And they exist. There's the, for example, ETSs, which could be used reversely. So if you capture a carbon, you get the benefit of that. You could have other business model where people buy carbon credits, and for example, the emission of Billerud correspond to 20% of Google's carbon credit needs, to give you one example. Or you create new materials out of it, biofuels, chemicals, and whatever you have, because you still need carbon in the general sense. So that is the thing we're going forward, and here probably what I would like to ask the regulators to do is particularly be aware that we think our carbon is by far better because it has a zero loop in the way it gets recycled or captured. But on the other hand, if you capture this carbon, it has exactly the same benefit than if you capture fossil carbon, except that you capture it twice, once with a tree growing and the other by doing it again. And here we need regulation, or we need at least the freedom of operation and the ability to create business models to pay for that particular process. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Agnes, I ask you.
Yeah, how do we live in a bioeconomy today? I think it's a great theme for a conference session because there are many examples of the bioeconomy in our everyday life and in the products that we use. So thank you very much for inviting Europa Bio to speak in this session today. And for those of you who don't know us yet, Europa Bio is the industry association based in Brussels representing the biotechnology industry. And we were set up in 1996 to provide a voice for the biotechnology industry. And today we mainly represent the healthcare biotechnology and industrial biotechnology. Europa Bio is also one of the founding members of the European Bioeconomy Alliance, which we've heard mentioned a couple of times today. So industrial biotechnology uses enzymes and microorganisms to make bio-based products in a range of different sectors. And they are as diverse as chemicals, food and feed, plastics, bio-based or paper and pulp, textiles, and bioenergy, for example. And we've heard about the recent bioeconomy conference, we've heard about the bioeconomy progress report today. And we welcome that these frame the bioeconomy really in the context of the European Green Deal. And as we've heard as well, the bioeconomy is cross-sectoral in nature, and it's important to emphasize synergies and links and ensure policy coherence. And to meet ambitious objectives that have been set, a range of solutions will be needed, and industrial biotechnology is positioned very well to contribute or to help contribute towards these. And we talk about all the different sectoral applications there and solutions that can help reduce the use of raw materials and energy, for example. And as I just said, industrial biotechnology uses enzymes and microorganisms to make bio-based products in a range of sectors. And this also helps reduce CO2 emissions, provide sustainable alternatives to fossil-based products, and improve the resource efficiency of industrial processes. So industrial biotechnology is an enabler or enabling technology for the bioeconomy. And of course, the potential of the bioeconomy doesn't only lie in the fact that it provides food feed materials, that it can help replace fossil carbon-based chemicals, materials, and fuels, but also that it can offer products with new and novel properties and functionalities. And I think it's also important to emphasize the word economy in bioeconomy. It's critical that Europe transforms competitively if industries in Europe are to compete worldwide. And here it's also important to make sure that the green transformation is made from a position of enabling competitiveness. And we're speaking of living in the bioeconomy today and tomorrow, and I've been asked to zoom in a bit more on the food sector. And first I would like to say that industrial biotechnology has been routinely used for decades in food and feed production. And there are examples that we don't even reflect about. And one example is the rennet that is used in cheese production. The rennet enzyme used to be extracted from the cow's stomach, and today really the major share is microbial or non-animal rennet. And we really have the potential of making food production more efficient and to disrupt some of how some of our food products and macronutrients are produced today. And vitamins is an example I wanted to bring up here. Because I think many people don't really think about where the vitamins come from, and that actually many of them, or most of them, are made through chemical synthesis. One example that I wanted to raise here today is vitamin B2, which is an essential vitamin that humans and animals need to access through the diet. And for decades, this has been produced through chemical synthesis, but over the last 15 years, we've seen a transformation, and basically today, all vitamin B2 that is used for human or animal nutrition and health applications is produced through or by fermentation using biotechnology. And this has also shown several environmental benefits: reduction of fossil raw materials, reduction in wastewater, and also in exhaust emissions. And I think it's also very interesting to look at the companies and startups that are advancing really fast in this space, including in the Nordics, and that they really have a vision to accelerate the biomanufacturing alternative for vitamins. Another example I wanted to bring up relates to replacing natural extraction for ingredients. And here, for example, the stevia. Stevia plants are a scarce resource, and the yield of the useful substance from this plant is actually quite low. And that means it's hard to satisfy the growing demand only from the plant. And in the stevia example, companies have been working towards engineering yeast to produce stevia components that are identical to those that are found in the plant itself. And not only is the production process more efficient or easier to scale up, and the quality is consistent, but it also comes with reduction in both carbon footprint and land use, which is of course important as well. So these are just a few examples to show that we have the potential to change and disrupt how many of our ingredients are produced today. And we have been talking also about sustainable consumption patterns, sustainable innovation, and the waste hierarchy, which of course are important in the bioeconomy strategy and in the progress report and the different communications that we have around the bioeconomy. And of course, resource efficiency is also an important principle in the bioeconomy, where the actors aim to use really the different parts of the biomass. And here on the slide, I'm showing spent coffee grounds because it's just one example to show that you can, from this, produce ingredients for personal care, food and beverages, or for example, extracting essential oils from orange peels, which can be used in applications that range from food applications, but also, for example, cleaning products. And of course, when we talk about food and the bioeconomy, there is a growing demand at the international level in Europe and beyond for sustainable proteins for a growing population. And many approaches and solutions will, of course, be needed here. And this year, Europa Bio will go with our annual conference, the European, or the EFIB conference, as we call it, to Rotterdam. And food, feed, and nutrition is going to be one of the thematic areas that we are going to focus on. And I mentioned the Netherlands, since we are having our conference there this year, but it's not only the world's second largest exporter of farm food, it is also a country that holds a strong position in industrial biotechnology in the agri-food and nutrition space. And this includes both established companies and the growing number of startups and smaller companies that, for example, produce alternative proteins using biotechnology, just to name one example. And of course, I mentioned the Netherlands, but there are many other companies and countries very active in this space as well. And I think the growing demand, both for sustainable products and solutions, as well as the need to have more sustainable production methods, it really doesn't go unnoticed by investment companies. And we're seeing growing interest from investors in this protein transition, but also the biotech solutions that can be offered there. And there, I think it's also important to look at the global perspective and see what's happening in other parts of the world and how investments are made there, and also have the discussion around, do we have the ecosystem needed to really grow and scale up our startups here in Europe? And to end on a positive note, I hope that the examples that have been shown here today have given you an insight or a small glimpse into industrial biotechnology, which has been a key player for a long time in providing sustainable ingredients for food and feed, like vitamins, amino acids, organic acids, oligosaccharides, flavorings, and enzymes. And now the scope is expanding also to looking at fields such as alternative proteins, etc. And I wanted to just leave you with how the FAO is framing the sustainable and circular bioeconomy, because it puts innovation, it puts responsible production and consumption, and zero waste in the center. And they have also listed benefits that moving to the circular bioeconomy can bring. So you see some of them listed here. And I think these are also important to zoom back to the EU policy discussions that we're having today, and to make sure that we all work to have an enabling policy environment, policy coherence, and really recognizing that the bioeconomy in Europe is key for delivering the European Green Deal.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. We are going to have our youth ambassador soon, but I would ask I would ask our two previous speakers to join me on stage so he doesn't feel too alone there. And while you come up, I will introduce you. Others can just stretch your arms a little bit like that. And it's late afternoon. Yes, don't be so Swedish now. You can, come on, stretch a little bit. Come on, it's not scary. I'm sure you do that also now and then in Brussels. Voting. How many like bioeconomy? Okay, good. Maybe some against? Yes? No? Okay, one. Good. We have Derek Kelgay here right now.
Dara Cogley.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. You know me, my last name. I'm also used to people pronouncing it.
Yeah,
anyway, and then I had the same problem myself. Anyway, so the Bioeconomy Youth Ambassador with a background in sustainable fashion, but also in business and economics. I mean, you are one of these young entrepreneurs, and like John also talked about, the next generation. The world we are leaving to you guys. So, as a youth ambassador, what is your take on the bioeconomy, please?
Yeah. So firstly, thank you for having me, Ugna, and for continuing to hear the voice of youth at these events. It's much appreciated. So the question I was asked to address was, how do we make consumers choose more bio-based options? So as youth ambassadors, when we first met in the summer, we decided on what our mission would be. So part of that mission is to use bioeconomy as a lever to prevent climate change and protect nature as best we can. So this not only means shifting to more bio-based products, but also shifting the narrative of consumption away from more and towards less, where possible. So today I'll address how can we make people consume less overall, and when necessary to encourage consumption of bio-based and sustainable products. So I started this off by questioning what shapes modern consumerism. So I came up with lots of things, but I'm going to focus on 4 C's, which are very interrelated. So cost and convenience, 2 quite obvious ones, and then 2 more relevant ones to living in the bioeconomy, which are connection and culture. And the solution I came up with in solving these, it's not quite a C, but with a bit of imagination, transparency. So I was thinking back on things related to the bioeconomy and how we can link this, and I remembered reading an amazing paper by Madhavi Venkatasan on the role of culture and moral responsibility in a sustainable bioeconomy. So in this paper, she speaks about the mismatch in market incentives between consumers and producers, and how consumers are incentivized to maximize their utility or consumption, and how they're increasingly less conscious of the processes, the people, and the impacts involved in actually producing what they consume. Producers, on the other hand, are incentivized to minimize their costs in order to maximize their profits and grow. This has meant externalizing the true costs to the global south, to the environment, and to future generations. Just last week we were in Brussels and we saw in a presentation there we only pay 1/3 of the true cost for food, for example. So in the same paper, Venkatasan reminds us culture is learned, particularly consumer culture. It can therefore be unlearned and changed. So until relatively recently in human history, we lived in harmony with nature. And the reason for that is we were connected to it. So even to this day, when we look at indigenous cultures, they even forego short-term consumption in favor of long-term regeneration. So the idea that we have unlimited wants and insatiable needs is a social value, and it's one I was even taught in my university in economics, for example. And this is consistent with modern consumer culture. It's shaped by marketing, by oversupply, and an economic system that requires infinite growth despite finite resources. So in the fashion industry, which I'm involved in now, it's responsible for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 20% of industrial water pollution, significant impacts in water scarcity, biodiversity loss, and human rights issues. In the EU alone, the lack of awareness on the consumer side and this mismatch in incentives between consumers and producers leads to 5.8 million tons of textile waste each year, which is 11 kilograms per person, the majority of which is plastic-based, and a significant portion of this is exported to the global south, which is then either burned or dumped near waterways to be thrown into the ocean and broken down into plastic microfibers, which persist in nature. So this issue turned waste colonialism is not a great example of thinking global and acting local. So how can we change this? The answer for me starts with transparency. I work for a company called Become, short for Become Conscious. We help fashion brands trace their supply chains and build relationships with their suppliers to assess, improve, and communicate impacts to consumers, thereby educating them and giving them an honest chance to make conscious decisions based on the holistic costs of a garment, thereby shaping demand and changing the culture. The results have been very inspiring. On the producer side, they've been able to achieve significant environmental savings in abiotic depletion, water scarcity, global warming, and eutrophication. And through traceability, they've been able to understand the context of their impacts by discovering where on the value chain they occur. On the consumer side, brands have seen significant increase in demand after communicating this data, including easy to understand equivalence and the savings of buying their products versus the industry standard versions. For example, EcoAlf, a company who make products from recycled materials as well as bio-based ones, saw a 13% increase in their online conversion rate after communicating this data. This is set to get even better as EU regulations on substantiating green claims, circularity, eco-design, and digital product passports, to name a few, will turn this competitive advantage into a real one. So for consumers to do the right thing, to consume less, and then when they are consuming, to make sure it's higher quality, bio-based options, we must empower and educate them to do so by reconnecting them with what they consume, and the first and most powerful step is transparency. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Actually, it's interesting. I mean, you do challenge sort of the business models that we have today also. And maybe that can also be a question back to our representatives from business. How much is the bioeconomy and the push we see now, even though you are coming from sectors, of course, where you are part of the bioeconomy, but how much is that challenging your fundamentals, you would argue, the fundamental way you are operating and thinking in terms of market development?
Well, if I start, so I come from the consumer goods industry before, and the change we are seeing is that actually consumer are more aware, consumer are more ready to pay for a slightly more environmental or sustainable product, and the brand owners are coming to us for solution because it's very difficult. And I think Annika and I were from an industry where actually we have sustainable materials in our stable, and therefore we see ourselves as a major, I would say, communicator, consultant, apostle to talk about these things and how brand owners can change, and they can change.
Annika, what do you say?
Yeah, well, I think the opportunities are endless, really. I showed now construction here, we know textiles, we know biochemicals and so on. But we also need to come, unless we reforest big parts of Europe, and I think that should be an ambition for us to really kind of make sure that there is more forest available. We have to acknowledge it's a renewable resource, but it's not endless. And we need, therefore, to all the time, when we use it, to make sure that it's the best value for the environment, for the society, and for the business at the same time, all the time. And I can bring up some recent innovations here just to encourage you also that we can have wind turbines, the blades made out of wood. We all know what an issue that is to kind of recycle the wooden, the turbine blades. We can have the towers of windmills made out of wood. We can have the telephone masts made out of wood. So there are so many innovations happening out there. We can have batteries made out of wooden components. So I think here the issue is to choose wisely, because it's not a silver bullet that can solve everything. And the sectors that are the polluters, they need to start paying the price of their polluting activities.
Well, just very quickly, I will let you in, Lena. Just very quickly, when you say these are all the things we can do, and I mean both of you represent, all three of you represent, these are all the opportunities that we have. What is the main barrier? Is it market, cost, policy, or perception?
Well, first of all, the material, even if the forest grows, as I said, it's not endless. No. So for us, the job is all the time to choose for the best applications and make sure that we grow as much forest as possible. If we can do that, then, and not harvest more than we plant, then we can do these innovations. But the problem is not the technology. The problem is actually scaling up innovations in an environment that still subsidize fossil industry is still subsidized. We shouldn't forget that. And there are a lot of policy hinders in order to allow these materials to enter the market and scale up quickly. And in construction, we have known to construct 26-story high buildings 20 years back. So we can do it. But there are so many barriers in policy that need to be also removed.
So you say mainly policy barriers. Lena, will you come in?
Well, going back to transparency and change, I think the same rule applies here as in marketing. You have a small group that understands the changes, you have the followers, and then follow the big rest of the group. And, sorry, one of the problems is that substitution is not into the statistics. And that is a real plea to the Joint Research Center, to the Commission, because as long as the consumer just get facts from one part of the whole value chain, they will never be able to take the right decision when they choose a product. It's like textiles, or whether it's buildings or packaging materials or whatever. And I think this is, and the Eco Design Directive could be used for this if expanded. It's already in place, and it could be used in a number of areas that it's not already. And to think about the textiles, for example, all the damage, water, microplastics, and so on, when you could use a biofiber that could be recycled 8 to 9 times in Sweden and 3.5 only in Europe. That's a disgrace, actually. Should be more recycled, could be more recycled, and now we have evidence it could be recycled even up to 30 times. And then you have something completely different on the market. But it will never happen unless the substitution is also in the statistics. And we could take product after product or market after market when the consumer only gets a small fraction of the actual truth about what the product is doing environmentally or economically or from an energy point of view.
So that's really strengthening what you drive, the whole transparency issue. If consumer is informed, they will actually make better choices. Agnes, you wanted to comment as well.
Well, it was coming back to your original question, because I think it's also going beyond the sectors that maybe we represent here on the panel, but it's an important transition phase for Europe as a whole, you know, moving away from the more fossil petrochemicals to the bio-based era. And I think we've heard about how other countries, we've heard China mentioned today, the US also had an executive order on biomanufacturing not long ago. So we also see the speed now picking up and being quite fast in other parts of the world. So I think it's very important to really make sure that we make the most out of the technologies that we have so that we don't become, you know, the consumers of innovative bio-based products made elsewhere in the world.
And do you see the risk? I mean, quite often in Sweden we talk about the fact that we have a very innovative economy, but when it comes to upscaling, then others take over. Is that the risk you see in Europe in general?
Yes, I think the issue is not the innovation or the technologies. No. It's indeed the speed to market, the pathway there, making sure that the ecosystem is in place, the whole different pieces of the puzzle. And I also think an important part is we have heard about how the bioeconomy is important for the broader policy goals, but also to make sure that that is reflected into the files that are coming out from, you know, from the Commission and when they are actually going to be implemented, because this is important too.
Okay, short, because then I want to also get Alessandra on board.
Of course, upscaling is a problem when you know that you are investing billions. It takes a number of years to get the permits, and then it takes a number of years to build, and then a number of years to get the factory running perfectly. You know, if you when you buy your first car, or if new, you have to drive carefully in the beginning. It's the same with a big industry. It takes a lot of years. And the regulation we have is not enhancing upscaling.
Okay.
So it's very easy for other countries where the technology is mature to take it to other countries. So we need also to shorten the time for permit, for building, and for upscaling. Otherwise, we'll always be in the second place, not the winner, on the technology and the innovation that we are paying so much for and putting so much work into. And I think this is really important to consider. You started asking about the economic risk, political risk, technical risk, and so on. And right now, when I talk to the industry in my work in the inquiry, they are putting the political risk as the worst one. And that is something that we should consider as decision makers. And if I would have one other plea to the European Commission and to the Joint Research Center, is that look into the European regulation and see to where it's counteractive. Because we have regulation in different areas that are working against the bioeconomy, against the green package, against a more sustainable agriculture. And there are lots of examples, and a cleaning facility to see to that the regulation actually is delivering what we're asking for would be marvelous for the whole of Europe.
Yeah, we've heard that for a long time, so maybe we can come back to it. Why
I have
why
examples.
yes, I know where the barriers still are, why we have them. Even John talked very much about before about policy coherence, I mean, as a critical thing. Alessandra, from the research perspective still, I mean, we heard all these marvelous examples of what you can do, but I recall looking at some of the things you presented, there were challenging trends, in particular when it came to part of the bioeconomy. Where do you see, from the research perspective, where are the research questions that you need to try to grasp now? And what about goal conflicts? This is something that is quite often brought up in these discussions.
I started my presentation before saying that this is a very complex issue. And I think that all the presentations, the discussion, and the examples that we have been hearing before my talk and after my talk prove that it is complex, that there are many trade-offs. And even here, we just said maybe not all the sectors are represented or the challenges. So all these discussions, and really to achieve the objectives of the Green Deal and the bioeconomy in particular, we really need to have the right evidence and the right facts. And why we already have a lot, and both industry, even the young generation, the youth ambassadors now use science and results. What now is needed is to put an interdisciplinary approach, so looking at more discipline, the other discipline, and put all this discipline together, but also researching more in integrating assessment, system thinking, and complexity science, because we will not solve all these issues and the trade-off and the competing elements of this policy if we don't have a deep understanding of the consequences and of the possibilities, of the challenges, of the potential. So for me, this is where we should now look at, which is not easy, is another challenge for science as well, but this is exactly the direction to go. And I have to say that at the Joint Research Center, we have started to move into this direction. Now we carry out our research in what we call portfolio, where we put different disciplines and different groups together, and we try to look at these policies from different angles in a multidisciplinary approach. Having said this, I've heard the pleas, we will look into this, and I'd also like to hear from the audience or from those looking at our products, our knowledge centers, our products. Tell us what you think is needed, because I can have an idea, but you have the better idea.
One critique quite often coming to science, since I'm coming from that community myself, is that we hear we need to change now, it's going to be quick by 2030. I mean, it's urgent, okay? The whole Green Deal is urgent. We have to do this now. Scientists, it's complex. It's complexity. It takes time. We have to connect systems and so on. Are these, like the Bioeconomy Knowledge Center, is that one way of trying to integrate the realities of policy and business with the sort of scientific process and try to speed up a little bit the knowledge building?
Yes, absolutely. But I think the knowledge we have today is good to move forward, to measure and to move forward. What we need is the science for the next 10 years. Where do we want to be in next 10 years, and which science we need to develop now to reach that level in 10 years. But what we need today to face certain challenges is, in my opinion, available. We can still fill up some gaps, but we have a lot of knowledge. But what will happen in 10 years, we have to study now. We have to have this foresight approach and this anticipatory approach and design the line of science today to reach that target.
That make them exciting over here. So can you please, Christoph, first? And then
Yeah, but I think science has two responsibilities. I think the first one is, what is the science today is the best of our ability, what we know, to take the right decision, and not to let that colored by lobbyism, ideology, etc., because we know that's a major issue. And the consumers these days are more confused by that than by the 10-year science goal. The second part is then the long term, where surely I think government science and private science can work on these issues and solve those questions for the future. But today, if you look at us as an industry, I'm very interested in two things. A, that we have a common truth that we can base ourselves on, and then I like your point about we have a common regulation which is not conflicting and all these different aspects, and we exit the complexity of that.
And just to challenge you, when you say about a common truth, what do you mean by that? I mean, this again, it's a moving system. There is a lot of changes. What do you mean by common?
I mean, take life cycle analysis. Okay, I think it's a very, very good tool where you look at all the components of a material or service from cradle to grave. Okay, and it can be recycled, or it can be one usage, or whatever it might be. It is so easy just to play with the assumption and to come to different conclusions. And then you hear, well, the best coffee packaged is actually a pod because you don't waste the coffee. And if all that is on the coffee, well, that is actually true. But from a packaging material, a pod is clearly less good than other things. So we need to have a much better way to communicate. And I like the point of transparency, but it has to have a truth to the transparency. And it shouldn't be the three small liner on Facebook, whatever, Instagram, etc., who defines that truth. And that is where I'm missing sometimes, your organization be much more vocal when saying what is actually true and what's not.
Yeah, that's what you try to do in these reports, not least. Yes, Lena, and then Annika, you want to?
I think I put years of my life into negotiating the European emission trading system. And sometimes it's like we are all wanting the absolute godly truth in a matter, instead of taking step by step in a practical direction. And I think this is somewhat hampering what we're trying to do with the Green Deal. And as soon as there are a couple of proposals in the right direction, there comes something in, but there's a tiny detail here that's not working. Okay, we have to start all over again. Instead of working us slowly through to a practical solution that works better and better. And the European emission trading system was not ideal from the beginning. No. There were no statistics available, very heavy discussions, heated discussions. But when we look at it now, it is delivering. Every year, every week, every day, it is delivering towards a good result. So I think we have to have a practice in our working methods that is like that. And the second thing is there has to be a lot more cooperation between what you are doing at the Joint Research Center, and I think national, like the academia, like the Royal IVA and KSLA in Sverige, the academies. Because there is, as I see it now, there is a gap in between what you are doing and what the national institutions are doing in many fields, actually. And I know it's because of resources and not lack of goodwill, but I think this is really important to connect more, actually.
But it's interesting, as you stress, I will let you both in. I mean, you stress the learning when you develop policies. They don't need to be perfect from the start, learn and adapt and so on. But of course, the scientific community is also sometimes challenging. I know that in Sweden, for instance, we had 2 debate articles from 500 researchers being against, 500 researchers being for. So also from the scientific, I mean, this is science, of course. Science shouldn't agree. Science should always. So that science policy interface is complicated. Annika?
I think the CO2 debate, we can go into the complicated issues of biodiversity, for instance, which is a hugely kind of complex matter where we learn new things all the time. But if we stay kind of on one of the things we have known is that fossil emissions are not good. We have known that now for 35 years, and still, 135 years even, and still the picture is what Lena showed, very little progress in total. And we need to come to a point where fossil industry is not subsidized anymore. It's still subsidized. We need to come to a point where it is more expensive for the polluter. And as you said, as a youth ambassador, only 1/3 of the true costs are really kind of there. So that means in order for innovative new materials to disrupt the status quo, they need to have a level playing field. And that means the stick, it is polluters pay, and then it is the carrot to make sure that you have an easy way to scale up solutions that are better for tomorrow. And if we can't do that after all the discussions that we have, I think we have a great issue here. And the bioeconomy needs to be circular bioeconomy. So we need to think about, for the material system, where does the material actually come from? Because if we don't take that into the equation from the beginning, it's not only enough to have a circular system, and then we're still stuck in dependencies from kind of finite materials. And just like you said, if we're going to stay within the planetary boundaries, we need to make sure that we are much more efficient. We have so much waste in the system. 80% of all the materials are wasted. That is kind of, we need to be able to reuse more, to take back more, recycle, and have better handling of our systems.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that still in so many parts of the economy. 30% of the food is wasted. As you said, textile. I mean, it's quite amazing after such a long time. Did you want to add something before I also then have John who want to make a comment, so we can have a microphone to him? So please.
Yeah, just picking up on a few of the points that were said. I mean, of course, science-based policy is very important, and LCA methodologies were also mentioned, which are important as well. I just think it's important to keep in mind as well when we talk about the bioeconomy and new and innovative bio-based products, that it's important to ensure fair comparisons, because if you look at a sector, for example, like plastics or new innovative bioplastics, you know, there is the maturity curve or the maturity time is quite different. So I think we have also seen a couple of challenges in, you know, some of the footprint methodologies that we have seen and how this is addressed. So really to make sure that you really account for issues like biogenic carbon uptake, for example, but keeping in mind, you know, that what type of products or applications or maturity level that you are actually comparing.
That's interesting, because we tend to have really a challenge to compare one study from another, for instance. I mean, yeah, exactly. Annika.
One last comment just before I let the audience in, of course, is that I think it was yesterday that the price for CO2 was at 100 euros per ton. And in order for all these innovations to kind of pick up, you need much higher price on that. So that alone will create a lot of drive if we manage to get a...
That is great. It's 100 at least. It was down to 5,
Yes.
6.
And then you do not drive any transition if
You
it's
don't.
not...
True.
If it's not costly
Polluter
enough.
pays principle is one of the Rio principles since 1992. John.
So first, a personal comment, not as a European Commission person. Carbon capture and storage is also a political description of people and parties and so forth, and that's an issue for our democracies to deal with. You asked what the common truth is, and Annika, you've just named it. The common truth is the word price. That's the common truth. That's the answer to Dara's conundrum. And there's a very big issue here in that I think you called it at one point the colonialism of waste. The biggest single challenge for the market economy's transition, whichever version of the market economy you go from, we have a social market economy in the European Union, it's in the treaties, is the internalization of the externalities. How are we going to internalize the externalized prices so that we actually are paying something approaching the price of what things actually cost? This is an economic challenge. We were talking about this, Alessandra, over lunch. How are we going to actually, number one, measure and put a price in a realistic way, and then through transparency and maybe improved governance systems, have markets actually adjust? You will have financial sectors like insurance will do it quite quickly. They'll put new prices on property, for example, where the sea is rising and so forth. But there's a challenge here. There's a failure in economics in some way to actually work out. There's somewhere along the line there is a problem in the way in which prices are functioning. And the second part of that for policymakers and regulators in compliance it is actually a market distortion. Is it not an issue of competition? Are we actually functioning as a market economy properly if we can't actually put a price and pay a price which is actually the price that the actual market is externalizing different places? I think there's a major challenge here for they call it the dismal science in English, They used to say if you could take all the economists in the world and lie them end to end, that would be a good thing. I'm not an economist. But I think it's one of the scientific challenges is actually what changed everything. Lena, you remember this. There is a price on carbon. It may or may not be the right price, but there is a price on carbon. So how do we actually do the economic scientific underpinning of that? And how do we identify what is, in effect, a market distortion in time? We're not just dealing in space and supply and demand. There is a different dimension here, and I think that's a major challenge. There's probably a Nobel Prize in there for somebody.
Excellent, thank you very much. And of course, it's even more complex when we look at it from a global market perspective, because a lot of the leakage has been also elsewhere. We are trying to adjust that. Just 1 second. Alessandra will need to leave 5 o'clock sharp. We have 5 minutes left. I will give you each, this classical 1 minute. And try to say, if you look at it from the next 2-3 years, what would be the most important policy shift that you would like to see in order to, in a positive way, drive the bioeconomy forward? I know this is a simple question that you always love to get, but anyway.
Policy shift is not for us, the scientific shift
that's fine.
And the challenge. We show today that the bioeconomy is going the right direction, but there is still work to do. So from the scientific point of view, what we want to see is that the policy options that we will mention here are still based on sound evidence and data. And the truth, the one truth will not come from science, and there will never be only one truth, in spite of the fact that we already work with national academies and scientists. But what counts is that all this is based on the result of discussion with the science and with the scientists.
So science-based decision-making. Lena?
I come back to transparency on both what we can gain and what we can lose. And I think the single thing that could change right now is to allow calculations on the true cost of the whole value chain. Annika brought it up with buildings. You could take it on packages, on textiles, like the ones I'm wearing today, that is recycled and to see to that you have the substitution included in the cost. Because right now it's so easy to say that this product has this value, a couple of kilos less emissions, but if you include the whole value chain, the substitution, and the way you put away fossil products, you have a totally different picture. And this is not shown to the consumers today. And that is what we need science to see to. How much is substitution adding to the calculation? And then we could have a full price. And then we will have a change, a true change, not like the one from 1970 till now where you can hardly detect a change.
No, that was a very strong graphic. Annika?
3 things. Price, to not distort the market, so that we distort the market in the direction we want it to be distorted. 2, every education, regardless if you are an economist or if you are an engineer or if you are any person studying politics, etc., should have included an understanding of sustainability on a deeper level than it is today, because these are the people that will work everywhere and set also the future. And I think that is lacking. That's why economy is not connected and so on and so forth. And thirdly, renewability. Just like we talk about renewable energy, renewability needs to be the first cornerstone in a circular kind of bioeconomy. So if you can't achieve that, then you need to move to kind of better options or lesser good options. And I believe that cornerstone is missing today. And the consequential analysis of looking at the substitution effect in many times can be much, much better than they are today.
Thank you very much. And it was interesting, this educational lock-in that you almost talk about, the fact that we continue to educate in a way.
Yes, for the past.
Has been for the past, yes.
And we need to educate for the future.
Interesting. It's an interesting point that we don't talk about it enough. Agnes?
I think it's very important that Europe really fully takes the advantage of the technologies and solutions that we have today. And I would like to come back again to the supportive and agile policy and regulatory frameworks that we really need to make the bioeconomy more a reality also tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christoph.
I think I only one thing. I would like that we are able to decide the things at the right level and don't forget the element of subsidiarity, you know, when we talk about decision making. I mean, there's very good examples today. The first one, I think you brought it up. In Europe, our graph is all stable. In Sweden, it has moved. So if we would have decided exactly the same things that we did in Europe, we would look the same. So that's not a good thing. And therefore, I think we need this, you know, we need front runners and we need the herd and we need both to make things happen. And that has to do with decision making. If I take the other example, I mean, you have seen Sweden has a growing forest, and yes, there are many things we can improve. And then Europe has no forest. Okay, so why don't we start where there is no forest to grow forest before we now start to have a European policy on forestry and whatever it is? Because countries are or geographic areas are different, and therefore you need to leave a little bit the horses for the courses rather than having anything unified.
Excellent. I mean, that was a question I would have liked to come back to, how much you see this being European policy, national policy, and so on as well. And I know this is something that you look into also a lot. Did you get, do you feel that you get more energy from this? Do you feel that, yes, we are moving in the right direction? They are leaving a better world for us? What do you think, Derek?
Those people on the stage, absolutely.
Yeah.
In general, I have mixed feelings on what the future will look like. I think, like, if I was to name like two things in general that I think the bioeconomy could do and could kind of latch onto in some ways is, firstly, on the demand side, as I mentioned, transparency, but then secondly, on the supply side and how do we control producer behavior. And I think there are lots of strong regulations within the European Union and lots still to come. And I think lots of the principles and objectives within the bioeconomy could be embedded within those upcoming policies, particularly eco-design, as we mentioned already, with substantiating green claims, circularity, etc. So I think that could be a very concrete thing that the bioeconomy could do as a whole.
Excellent. There are a lot of things going on right now. We have to really be there to make sure that we get the right stuff in there. And we should, of course, ask ourselves, who are the people in the audience who are not here today? I mean, who are we missing in the debate? There tends to be, I asked you a question, how many believe the bioeconomy is important in here? Let's see. Again? Yes. Okay. How many think it's not so important? So we need these guys here as well.
That's a leading question.
Obviously, to talk to them. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, Alessandra, I know that you need to rush off, so we have to thank the panel a lot. So big applause. So if you want, you can take a seat there. We only have a couple of minutes of information actually coming now as well. But I always want, this is always a bit of a nasty question to ask the audience, but I always like to check out, how many in here felt they learned something new today? Excellent, almost everyone. I like that. And how many have spoken to someone they didn't know before? Excellent. This is how a conference should be. You should meet new people, even though we don't meet the opposition here, obviously, to the bioeconomy. But anyway, we will make sure that we develop a strong message so we can meet them with knowledge and science and facts. That being said, there is going to be a dinner tonight. That's great, isn't it? Yeah, you need that. And what is also great is that the organizers, they have planned this very well. It means they give you 2 hours to do all those emails that we need to do after a day like this. So 7 o'clock, we will meet again in the next room here, and there will be a sustainable fashion show with some light presentations, I think, and discussions and so on. And that's going to last for about an hour. If I always look, as long as she's nodding, then it's okay. But then we do this, we walk collectively at 8 o'clock through this building. Don't get lost. There will be some exhibitions on the way there to look at from the forest industry, I think. And then there will be a dinner at about 8-ish, something like that. And then, of course, you know, that's where the real conference is happening, at the dinner table there. So 7 o'clock, back in there, but now you have some free time to do whatever you need to do. So thanks a lot for this afternoon.